Chapter 1. The Beanstalk and the Snoozerfest. Bayou Saint-Mere, or Sourel as some insisted, always felt like a dream half-remembered, a feverish haze clinging to the cypress knees and the perpetually damp air. It was a place where the mundane often tripped over the miraculous, and the grotesque danced a slow waltz with the sublime. This particular morning, however, began with a cacophony that was anything but subtle. Inside Cora's malt shop, the aroma of stale coffee and burnt Pop-Tarts usually battled with the faint, sweet scent of patchouli incense that Gumbo Dupree insisted on burning. Today, however, a new, more pungent odor permeated the air. The acrid tang of an argument between Gumbo and his talking kidney stone. The stone, a smooth, greyish pebble Gumbo had affectionately named Pebbles, was in rare form, its tiny, gravelly voice echoing off the chrome-plated cash register. "It's a hoax, I tell you." Pebbles rasped, vibrating slightly on the counter, next to a half-eaten blueberry Pop-Tart. "This town hall meeting is nothing but a thinly veiled attempt to gentrify our beloved swamp. They'll bring in their artisanal pickles and their craft sodas, and before you know it, we'll be paying $5 for a single organic celery stick." Gumbo, an octogenarian Vietnam vet with wrists that twitched precognitively, sighed, running a hand over his bald head. "Pebbles, my dear, you worry too much. It's just a meeting about the new drainage system. And besides, who doesn't love a good artisanal pickle?" He winked at Chaos, who was attempting to coax baby Jermaine Jr. into eating a spoonful of pureed cauliflower, a task that felt akin to negotiating a peace treaty with a particularly stubborn warthog. Chaos, at 18, was already a veteran of the absurd. His telekinetic abilities, inherited from Gumbo, often manifested as involuntary twitching in his left eyebrow whenever baby Jermaine Jr. projectile vomited. "Dad, can you please tell Pebbles to calm down? He's going to give Jermaine a complex about vegetables." Baby Jermaine Jr., a cherubic infant with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 forgotten souls, gurgled in agreement, swatting at a particularly audacious flying cockroach that had dared to land on his high chair tray. The cockroach, unfazed, merely flexed its antennae, a tiny, defiant gesture. Outside, the bayou was waking up. Mosquitoes, fat and sluggish from a night of feasting, droned lazily. The air hung heavy and humid, a chenille blanket woven with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Dorothea, the convent's logistics manager, bustled in, her sensible shoes squelching slightly on the perpetually moist floor. She carried a stack of flyers for the town hall meeting, her expression a mixture of exasperation and grim determination. "Gumbo, your incense is making my eyes water. And Pebbles, darling, your political commentary is charming, but we have a meeting to plan. This isn't a snoozerfest, it's about our community's future." She slapped the flyers onto the counter, narrowly missing Pebbles, who let out a high-pitched squeak of indignation. "Future? What future?" "They'll pave over Janet's Pond, I tell you. They'll turn the faceplant grove into a parking lot. It's all a burnout waiting to happen." Dorothea merely rolled her eyes. "Now, where's Sean? He was supposed to be here an hour ago to help set up the chairs. He's probably still in bed, dreaming of being an Andy Warhol superstar." Just then, Sean ambled in, his usually bewildered expression replaced by one of profound exhaustion. "Sorry, Dorothea. I had a dream I was trapped in a maze made of discarded dental dams. It was surprisingly intricate." He ran a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair, a 5 o'clock shadow already forming a respectable stubble on his chin. And then Ralph started yelling about the existential dread of a broken beanstalk. Ralph, the red parrot who resided in a cage near the malt shop's entrance, squawked indignantly. "It's not dread, you dolt. It's a metaphor for the fragility of societal constructs. You wouldn't understand, you crass Philistine." Dorothea sighed. "Right. Well, let's get this kickoff started. We have a lot to do before the meeting. And someone needs to clean up this bubblegum wrapper. It's attracting more flying cockroaches." She gestured vaguely at a sticky, iridescent wrapper near the cash register, which seemed to shimmer with an almost supernatural glow. The Blind School, a sprawling Victorian mansion shrouded in Spanish moss and ancient oaks, stood as a silent sentinel at the edge of Bayou Saint-Mere. Its ornate wrought-iron gates, perpetually ajar, seemed to invite both curiosity and apprehension. It was here, amidst the hushed corridors and the scent of old books, that Mr. Sukhamitika arrived, a new teacher whose presence stirred a subtle unease in the already peculiar ecosystem of the school. Mr. Sukhamitika was, by all accounts, a jack of all trades. He taught Braille, music, advanced philosophy, and even a rather abstract course on the theoretical physics of parallel dimensions. His suits, though impeccably tailored, always seemed to be made of an odd, shimmering chenille fabric that caught the light in strange ways. He carried a briefcase of well-worn suede, and his voice, a low, resonant baritone, had a hypnotic quality that made the students lean forward, eager to catch every word. He had a peculiar habit of snapping his fingers twice, a sharp, almost percussive sound, whenever he made a particularly profound point, a kind of clap-on clap-off for his intellectual pronouncements. Youngblood, with her innate psychic sensitivity, felt the subtle discord Mr. Sukhamitika brought. She was a quiet observer, her 26 years having taught her to trust her gut feelings, especially when those feelings manifested as a faint buzzing behind her eyes. She watched him during lunch, noting the way he meticulously arranged his cauliflower florets on his plate, as if performing a delicate resurrection diagram. There was an intensity in his gaze. Even when he was merely discussing the merits of different types of food stamps with a colleague, it was as if he saw more than what was physically present, a kind of internal penetration into the fabric of reality. Later that afternoon, during a lesson on classical music, Mr. Sukhamitika played a piece on the piano that was so hauntingly beautiful, so profoundly melancholic, that it brought a wave of euphoria to the students, a feeling akin to religious ecstasy. Youngblood, however, felt a prickle of unease. The music, while exquisite, seemed to resonate with a deeper, more unsettling frequency, like the faint echo of a distant blast. She saw him again in the evening, walking the grounds, his figure silhouetted against the twilight sky. He paused by a patch of overgrown roses, their petals a deep, velvety crimson, almost rose gold in the fading light. He reached out, his fingers brushing a thorny stem, and for a fleeting moment, Youngblood thought she saw a faint, shimmering aura around his hand. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving her to wonder if it was merely a trick of the light or something more profound. Youngblood had heard the whispers, of course. The rumors that circulated among the older students, tales of strange occurrences, of objects moving on their own, of a faint, almost imperceptible grunge that seemed to cling to the air around the new teacher. She dismissed them as mere gossip, the overactive imaginations of children in a peculiar school. But a part of her, the part connected to the ancient gate, knew better. Something was amiss. Something was profoundly, unsettlingly wrong. She remembered a story Gumbo had told her once about a beagle he'd owned as a boy, a dog that could sense earthquakes before they happened. Youngblood felt a similar tremor in her soul, a premonition of something vast and unsettling. It was the feeling you got when you saw a perfectly ordinary object, like a roach clip, and suddenly understood its true, terrifying purpose. It was the feeling of a broken clasp on a precious necklace, the sudden, jarring realization that something vital had been lost. As night fell, Youngblood found herself drawn to the window of her room, overlooking the sprawling grounds of the blind school. She saw Mr. Sukhamitika again, a solitary figure moving through the shadows. He stopped beneath a gnarled oak, its branches twisting like arthritic fingers against the bruised twilight sky. He looked up, directly at her window, and for a moment their eyes met. A chill, colder than the bayou night, snaked down Youngblood's spine. His gaze was knowing, ancient and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and understood even more. Midnight in Bayou Samir was a symphony of croaking frogs and chirping crickets, punctuated by the occasional splash of an alligator. Youngblood, unable to shake the feeling of unease, had crept out of her room, drawn by an irresistible compulsion. She moved like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the damp earth, making her way towards the gnarled oak where she had seen Mr. Sukhamitika. He was there, standing perfectly still, his back to her. The air around him shimmered, a subtle distortion that made the stars above seem to waver. Youngblood hid behind a thick bush, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched, mesmerized, as Mr. Sukhamitika slowly, deliberately, began to remove himself from his physical body. It wasn't a shedding or an unzipping, but a gradual, almost fluid separation. His form seemed to stretch, to elongate, like taffy pulled by an unseen hand. His limbs became attenuated, his head a mere suggestion, his torso a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The transformation was both horrifying and strangely beautiful, a grotesque ballet of molecular rearrangement. He became less human, more object. The shimmering chenille of his suit seemed to dissolve, replaced by something metallic and segmented. His skin, once a pale canvas, now pulsed with an inner light, like a dying star. Youngblood watched, her breath caught in her throat as the final vestiges of his human form melted away, leaving behind a colossal, pulsating dental dam. It was enormous, stretching upwards like a monstrous beanstalk, its edges glowing with an eerie, phosphorescent light. It vibrated with a low hum, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within Youngblood's bones, causing a strange tingling sensation in her teeth. The air around it crackled with an almost palpable energy, like 1,000 tiny jazz hands clapping in unison. Then, with a final, shuddering blast, the dental dam began to undulate, its surface rippling like disturbed water. It was no longer a static object, but something alive, something else. It began to ascend, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, until it was a colossal glowing mass against the night sky, a bizarre, cosmic roach clip hanging suspended above the bayou. It pulsed, it throbbed, it seemed to inhale and exhale the very essence of the night. Youngblood felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, a chilling realization that this was no mere magic trick, no simple hoax. This was something ancient, something powerful, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of Bayou Saint-Mere for far too long. She thought of the cash sash she had seen Mr. Sukhamitika wearing earlier, a strange, ornate belt woven with threads of gold and silver. It had seemed like a mere affectation then, a quirky fashion choice. Now, she wondered if it was a key, a conduit, a tether to whatever bizarre dimension he had just stepped into. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, raising goosebumps on her arms. She felt a sudden urge to scream, to run, to warn everyone. But her voice was trapped in her throat, her legs rooted to the spot. She was a witness to the impossible, a silent observer of a cosmic ballet. As the colossal dental dam pulsed and throbbed, Youngblood noticed something else, something even more unsettling. From its shimmering surface, tiny, almost imperceptible tendrils began to descend, reaching towards the ground like ethereal fishing lines. They were thin, almost invisible, but Youngblood's heightened senses could feel their presence, their subtle penetration into the earth. It was as if the dental dam was drawing something up from the very soil of Bayou Saint-Mere, something ancient and powerful. She felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest, a phantom ache that resonated with the bruises she had seen on the old oak tree, as if the tree itself was recoiling from the intrusion. She imagined someone, a hapless soul, dangling off an 11-story balcony, their fingers slipping, their fate sealed. That was how she felt now, teetering on the precipice of a terrifying revelation, her grip on reality tenuous at best. The rubble of her preconceived notions about the world lay scattered at her feet, shattered by the sheer impossibility of what she was witnessing. The world, she realized, was far stranger, far more terrifying than she had ever dared to imagine. The air in the canoe was thick with unspoken fear, the kind that clung to the skin like the bayou's perpetual humidity. Chaos, Cora, Sean, and Dorothea paddled in silence, their faces grim, the rhythmic dip of their paddles, the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. The colossal, pulsating dental dam, now a distant, glowing beacon in the night sky, cast an eerie, phosphorescent glow on the water. It was a sight that defied explanation, a cosmic anomaly that had ripped a hole in the fabric of their already peculiar reality. "I still can't believe it," Cora whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of the water against the canoe. "Mr. Sukhamitika, a giant dental dam? It's like something out of a bad dream." Sean, ever the pragmatist, though often bewildered, shivered. Worse. It's like something out of a good dream, gone horribly wrong. Like a Red Rover game where everyone loses. He glanced nervously at the glowing object, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. "Do you think it's going to do something?" Dorothea, usually unflappable, gripped her paddles so tightly her knuckles were white. "I don't know, Sean. But whatever it is, it feels malevolent. Like a Range Rover driven by a demon." She looked at Chaos, who was staring intently at the water, his telekinetic eyebrow twitching furiously. "Chaos, are you sensing anything?" Chaos shook his head, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a lot. Like 1,000 voices screaming at once, but they're not voices. And they're all pointing to that thing." He gestured with his chin towards the pulsating dental dam. "It's drawing something. Something big. Something old." Suddenly, the canoe lurched violently. A massive wave, seemingly from nowhere, slammed into their side, sending spray high into the air. The canoe spun, threatening to capsize. They scrambled to regain control, their paddles flailing in the dark water. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out from the depths of the bayou, intent on dragging them down. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, in the gridlocked arteries of Kansas City, Anne the little horse was fuming. She was stuck in traffic, her tiny hooves tapping an impatient rhythm on the dashboard of the beat-up pickup truck she was riding in. She had been visiting her family, a sprawling clan of miniature equines who lived in a charming, if somewhat cramped, suburban ranch house. Now, on her way back to Bayou Sainte-Mere, she was caught in a seemingly endless snarl of cars, her healing powers doing little to alleviate her growing frustration. "This is ridiculous," she whinnied, her voice a surprisingly deep rumble for such a small creature.
"I'm going to miss the town hall meeting."
And I specifically told Gumbo I'd bring him back some authentic Kansas City barbecue sauce. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over her, a familiar yet unsettling pull. It was a psychic intervention, a desperate plea echoing across the miles. She recognized the distinct mental signatures: Janet the slime troll, a chaotic swirl of green energy Gumbo, a steady, unwavering beacon of ancient wisdom, and two of the faceplants, their tiny, insistent voices like whispers on the wind. They were calling to her, their collective consciousness reaching out, a desperate attempt to avert a catastrophe. "We need you, Anna," Janet's thought voice, a gooey, shimmering presence, slithered into her mind. "The dental dam. It's going to tear a hole in reality. The bayou is in danger." Gumbo's voice, calm and resonant, followed. "The gate is unstable. Sukhumidika's transformation has awakened something. You must help them. The canoe, they are in peril." The faceplants, their voices a chorus of tiny, urgent whispers, added, "The water is rising. The currents are strong. They will be pulled under." Anai closed her eyes, focusing her considerable healing energy, not on herself, but on the distant bayou. She felt the surge of power, the familiar warmth spreading through her tiny body. She pushed, she pulled, she willed the currents to calm, the canoe to stabilize. It was a desperate gamble, a psychic tug-of-war across 1,000 miles, with the fate of Bayou Sainte-Mere hanging in the balance. The traffic around her seemed to fade, the blare of horns and the rumble of engines replaced by the urgent pleas of her friends. She poured every ounce of her being into the effort, her small frame trembling with the strain. The canoe, she knew, was teetering on the brink, and the colossal dental dam, a grotesque monument to the impossible, continued to pulse in the night sky, drawing something ancient and terrifying from the depths of the bayou. The fate of their world, once again, rested on the most unlikely of shoulders. To be continued, Chapter 2. The Nosebleed Horseman and the Flaming Baby Heads. The psychic intervention, a desperate, multi-pronged assault across time and space, hit the bayou with the force of a crosstown bus, veering wildly off course. Just as the canoe, laden with chaos, Cora, Sean, and Dorothea, threatened to capsize under the assault of the dental dam's malevolent currents, a wave of shimmering golden energy erupted from the water. It wasn't a physical force, but a mental one, a collective push from Janet, the slime troll, Gumbo, and the two faceplants, channeled through Anne's frantic efforts from a Kansas City traffic jam. In the canoe, the immediate danger subsided. The churning water calmed, the canoe righted itself with a gentle bob, and the oppressive dread that had clung to them like Spanish moss began to recede. Chaos, his telekinetic eyebrow still twitching, gasped,
"Why?"
Dorothea, ever practical, wiped sweat from her brow.
"I think, dear boy, we just got a cosmic nudge."
A very firm, very slimy, very Gumbo-esque nudge. She looked up at the colossal dental dam, still pulsing in the night sky, but now with a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Its eerie glow seemed to dim slightly, as if the psychic blast had momentarily disrupted its bizarre machinations. Meanwhile, Anna, still trapped in the purgatory of Kansas City traffic, felt the strain of her efforts. Her tiny body, usually a conduit for healing, thrummed with exhaustion. She had pushed her powers to their limit, a small, nosebleed horseman of healing, battling cosmic forces from the dashboard of a beat-up pickup. The thought voices of Janet, Gumbo, and the faceplants, now faint and distant, confirmed her success. "They are safe for now." As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hues of bruised purple and sickly orange, the canoe finally reached the shore. They stumbled out, exhausted and disoriented, their minds reeling from the night's events. The dental dam still hung in the sky, a silent, grotesque monument to Mr. Sukhomidika's bizarre transformation, but its immediate threat seemed to have receded. Back at Cora's malt shop, the morning crowd was already gathering, oblivious to the cosmic drama that had unfolded just hours before. The aroma of burnt Pop-Tarts and stale coffee once again filled the air, battling with the persistent scent of patchouli incense. Ralph, the parrot, perched on his stand, was in the midst of a particularly impassioned monologue, his red feathers ruffled with indignation. Don't even get me started on the footwear, Ralph squawked, addressing a bewildered tourist who had merely asked for a refill on his coffee. The year the Titanic went down, 1912, was a veritable wasteland of sartorial choices for the discerning gentleman. Oh, they had their lace-up ankle boots, of course, sturdy and practical, but utterly devoid of panache. And the button boots. A man might as well have strapped a small, uncomfortable accordion to his feet. He puffed out his chest, his beady eyes scanning the room for a reaction. And Don't even get me started on the music. While the world was reeling from the tragedy of that unsinkable ship, what were they humming? Moonlight Bay! A perfectly pleasant, if utterly saccharine tune. Or rakti me cowboy Joe. A jaunty little ditty, I'll grant you, but hardly a profound reflection on the fragility of human endeavour. Where was the gravitas? Where was the emotional depth? They were singing about bumblebees. For heaven's sake, bumblebees. Ralph punctuated his rant with a series of indignant squawks, scattering crumbs of a stale biscuit across the counter. No. The 19-teens were a snoozer-fest for the senses, a veritable burnout of cultural innovation. As Ralph continued his tirade, a strange phenomenon began to sweep through Bayou Saint-Mere. Dreams. Vivid, unsettling dreams of flaming babies' heads floating in stagnant water, their tiny, cherubic faces contorted in silent screams. The dreams were shared, a collective nightmare that seeped into the waking hours, leaving a lingering sense of dread and unease. People spoke of them in hushed tones, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. It was as if the dental dam, still hanging in the sky, was broadcasting its bizarre influence directly into their subconscious. Youngblood, meanwhile, was grappling with a revelation that shook her to her core. She had always identified as a woman, had lived her life as such, but the events of the previous night, the sheer, mind-bending absurdity of Mr. Sukhomidika's transformation, had triggered something deep within her. It was a memory, hazy and fragmented, of a shared peyote trip with Clotilde at the call centre, a night of profound, hallucinatory insights. In the aftermath of that psychedelic journey, she had emerged with a new, unshakable conviction. She was a woman. But now, as the dental dam pulsed in the sky, and the dreams of flaming babies' heads haunted her sleep, a different truth began to surface. A truth that was both liberating and terrifying. She realized, with a jolt that resonated through her very being, that she had always been a man. The peyote, in its benevolent, albeit confusing, wisdom, had simply allowed her to experience a different facet of her identity, a temporary, beautiful illusion. The realization hit her like a blast from a forgotten cannon, leaving her breathless and disoriented. Her entire life, a carefully constructed narrative, began to unravel. She looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror, seeing not a woman, but a man who had been hiding in plain sight, even from himself. The pink and grey living room attire she had chosen that morning suddenly felt alien, a costume she had worn for too long. The props of her identity, the carefully chosen gestures, the inflection in her voice, all seemed to crumble around her. It was a profound, almost violent, shedding of self, leaving her raw and exposed. She felt a strange sense of euphoria, a dizzying freedom that bordered on religious ecstasy, even as the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and buckle. The town hall meeting, originally intended to discuss drainage systems, quickly devolved into a chaotic free-for-all. The dreams of flaming babies' heads had everyone on edge, and the colossal dental dam, still visible in the daytime sky, served as a constant, unsettling reminder of the night's bizarre events. Ralph, still fuming about 1910's footwear, occasionally interjected with crass remarks about the attendees' lack of sartorial elegance. Amidst the pandemonium, a new fear began to circulate. Lester, the neighbour who had once attacked Clotilde, was nowhere to be found. Lester, a man known for his peculiar habits and his even more peculiar pigs. Pigs, it was rumoured, that had an insatiable appetite for, well, for anything. The whispers started subtly, then grew louder, fueled by the collective anxiety. Had Lester simply left town? Or had he, perhaps, become an unfortunate casualty of the strange events unfolding in Bayou Saint-Mere? Dorothea, trying to restore some semblance of order, pounded her gavel. Please, one at a time. We need to focus on the drainage issue. But a woman in the front row, her eyes wide with terror, shrieked, "What about Lester?" No one's seen Lester. And his pigs, they're looking awfully well fed. A collective gasp swept through the room. The image was too vivid, too grotesque to ignore. Lester, the cantankerous neighbour, reduced to mere sustenance for his own livestock. The thought hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like the bayou's humidity. Chaos, his telekinetic senses buzzing with a new, unsettling energy, felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He remembered the faint, almost imperceptible tendrils that had descended from the dental dam, their subtle penetration into the earth. Was it possible? Had Sukhamidica's transformation somehow influenced Lester's pigs? The idea was absurd, yet in Bayou Saint-Mere, absurdity was merely a prelude to reality. Sean, ever the one to lighten the mood, albeit morbidly, muttered, "Well, that's one way to avoid paying your taxes." Though I imagine the checkbook farts would be rather unpleasant. He immediately regretted the comment as Dorothea shot him a withering glare. As the meeting descended further into chaos, the dreams of flaming babies' heads intensified, morphing into waking hallucinations. People swore they saw tiny, fiery skulls bobbing in their coffee or peeking out from behind the hay bales at the farmer's market. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an unsettling energy, like a caution light blinking erratically in the distance. Youngblood, still reeling from her own profound revelation, felt a new wave of psychic input. It was a jumble of images. A statue of Liberty Nipples glowing with an unholy light, a yellow hillbilly mountain wrestler grappling with a giant flying cockroach harness, a Paris model strutting down a catwalk made of dead bodies, a stockbroker lawyer-based carpet unrolling itself across the bayou, and a Yanni Time magazine cover, its serene face replaced by a grinning skull. It was a cacophony of the bizarre, a testament to the unravelling sanity of Bayou Saint-Mere. She saw a vision of Lester's farm, the pigs snorting contentedly in their pens, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural intelligence. And then, a flash of something metallic, something that glinted in the sunlight. A broken clasp. A small, insignificant detail, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. It was the clasp from Lester's favourite pocket watch, a family heirloom he never took off. The thought was too horrifying to contemplate. Had Lester truly been fed to the pigs? Was this the grotesque reality of Bayou Saint-Mere, where even the most mundane disappearances could be attributed to such unspeakable acts? The collective fear in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket of dread. The dental dam pulsed above, a silent, cosmic witness to their unravelling. And then, a new image, sharp and clear, pierced through Youngblood's mind. A bonfire coffin, burning brightly in the distance, its flames licking at the night sky. And within the flames, a faint, almost imperceptible outline of a man. Lester, or what was left of him. The pigs, she realized, were merely a distraction, a gruesome red herring. The true horror lay elsewhere, in the flickering shadows of the bonfire. The question remained. Who had lit the fire? And why? To be continued. Chapter 3. The Fruitcake Gelatin and the Pickled Feet. The acrid scent of burnt wood still hung heavy in the bayou air, mingling with the sweet, cloying smell of decay. Chaos, Youngblood, Cora, Sean, and Dorothea stood before the smouldering remains of what Youngblood had psychically identified as a bonfire coffin. The dawn light, filtered through the Spanish moss, cast long, distorted shadows, making the familiar landscape seem alien and menacing. The dreams of flaming babies' heads had subsided, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache behind their eyes, a collective hangover from the night's surreal horrors. "So, this is it," Sean muttered, kicking at a charred log. "Lester's final resting place. Though I must say, for a man who loved his pigs so much, it's a rather undignified end." "Not so fast, my bewildered friend," Dorothea said, her voice a low, almost baritone pitch-black with suspicion. She pointed to a series of faint scuff marks leading away from the bonfire, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. "Lester was many things, but he was not one to go quietly into the night. And these marks suggest he didn't go willingly, at all. Chaos, his telekinetic senses still buzzing from the dental dam's lingering psychic residue, knelt, examining the ground. She's right. There's a faint psychic trail here. It feels deliberate, like false flag events, designed to mislead. He followed the trail, his companions close behind, their footsteps crunching on dried leaves and twigs. The trail led them deeper into Lester's overgrown property, past rusted farm equipment and dilapidated sheds, until they reached a gnarled cypress tree, its ancient branches draped with thick vines. And there, tied to the tree with what appeared to be several lengths of discarded cable car's rope, was Lester. He was disheveled, disoriented, and muttering incoherently about Moo Goo Gai Paul and the existential dread of fruitcake gelatin. His eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around, as if seeing things that weren't there. He was alive, but clearly not well. "Lester!" Cora exclaimed, rushing forward. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Lester blinked, his gaze finally settling on them. The lights," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The coloured lights. They tied me up. Said I was interfering with the signal. The signal from the syrupy moon landing hoax." He shuddered, pulling against his bonds. "And then they made me watch. They made me watch the bonfire. Said it was a message." Youngblood, her recent revelation still fresh and unsettling, felt a surge of empathy for Lester. The world, she realized, was a far more fluid and deceptive place than she had ever imagined. Identities, realities, even gender could be reshaped, reinterpreted, or simply misunderstood. The Peyot-induced clarity that had once defined her as a woman now seemed like a cruel joke, a cosmic prank played by a mischievous deity. She looked at Lester, tied to the tree, babbling about moon landing hoaxes, and saw a reflection of her own recent disorientation. The line between sanity and madness, between truth and illusion, was as thin as a spider's silk. As they untied Lester, a familiar, gravelly voice piped up from Gumbo's pocket. "Aha! Just as I suspected. A classic misdirection. A false flag event of the highest order, Pebbles, the talking kidney stone, vibrated with self-satisfaction. The bonfire was merely a distraction, a theatrical flourish to divert attention from the true perpetrator. This reeks of Sukhomitica's influence, I tell you. The man, or whatever he is now, has a flair for the dramatic. Dorothea raised an eyebrow. And what, pray tell, is the true perpetrator up to, Pebbles? Why, he's consolidating his power, of course, Pebbles declared. He's creating a black hole of absurdity, drawing all of Bayou Saint Mere into his bizarre orbit. And, mark my words, this is just the beginning. This is hardball survival, folks. Back at the malt shop, the news of Lester's survival and his bizarre tale of coloured lights and moon landing hoaxes spread like wildfire. The initial relief quickly gave way to a new wave of fear and suspicion. If Lester hadn't been fed to the pigs, then who was responsible for the bonfire? And what was Sukhomitica's ultimate goal? The dreams of flaming babies' heads, though less frequent, still haunted the town. People started seeing them in their waking hours, fleeting glimpses in reflective surfaces or shimmering in the steam rising from a bowl of beet soup. The collective anxiety was a palpable thing, a thick, oppressive fog that settled over Bayou Saint-Mere. Ralph the parrot, sensing the shift in the town's mood, decided it was time for another monologue. He perched on the counter, next to a forgotten sippy cup, and cleared his throat. You know, this reminds me of the great Choctaw Uprising of 1831. Or perhaps the time I witnessed a scantily clad circus performer attempt to juggle flaming chainsaws while reciting Shakespeare. The point, my dear bewildered humans, is that chaos, like a well-aged Turkish delight, is often more palatable when presented with a certain panache. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. But I digress. We were discussing the unsettling discovery of, well, let's just say, not everyone in Bayou Saint-Mere is as wholesome as they appear. He gestured vaguely towards the back room, where a new, even more disturbing rumour had begun to circulate. A rumour that would soon ignite the town's simmering paranoia into a full-blown inferno. Janet the slime troll, usually a creature of serene, if somewhat gooey disposition, was in a state of profound distress. She sat on her favourite cot in the depths of Janet's pond, surrounded by shimmering, iridescent bubbles, her normally placid surface rippling with agitation. The reason for her turmoil, a tiny, almost imperceptible bulge in her otherwise amorphous form. Janet, the slime troll, was pregnant. The news, when it inevitably leaked, hit Bayou Saint-Mere like a tidal wave. Janet, the embodiment of the town's wild, untamed spirit, pregnant? And no one, not even Janet herself, knew who the father was. The implications were staggering, the possibilities endless and terrifying. Was it a human? A creature from the bayou? Or something far more otherworldly? A byproduct of Sukhomitica's bizarre transformation? The town, already on edge from the flaming babies' heads and the dental dam in the sky, erupted. The whispers turned into shouts, the suspicions into accusations. A mob began to form, their faces contorted with fear and righteous indignation. They carried torches and pitchforks, their eyes gleaming with a dangerous fervour. They were convinced that Janet's pregnancy was another sign, another harbinger of the encroaching madness, a direct consequence of the strange events that had plagued their town. They saw her as a symbol of the unknown, a threat to their already fragile sense of order. "It's unnatural," someone screamed, their voice echoing across the swamp. "A slime troll can't be pregnant. It's a black hole of morality." "She's a witch," another cried. "She's bringing darkness to our town. We need to send her back to the North Pole where she belongs." The mob, a swirling vortex of fear and ignorance, descended upon Janet's pond. Their anger, fueled by the collective anxieties of the past few days, was a tangible force, a primal scream against the encroaching absurdity. They were convinced that Janet, in her innocent, slimy way, was responsible for all their woes, a convenient scapegoat for the inexplicable horrors that had befallen Bayou Saint-Mere. Janet, sensing their approach, recoiled deeper into the murky depths of her pond, her iridescent surface trembling. She was terrified, not for herself, but for the tiny, unknown life growing within her. She didn't understand their anger, their fear. She was merely a vessel, a conduit for a mystery she herself couldn't comprehend. The mob, however, saw only a monster, a symbol of everything they feared. They were ready to act, to cleanse their town of what they perceived as an abomination. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash between the mundane and the monstrous, between fear and the unknown. The fate of Janet and her unborn child hung precariously in the balance, illuminated by the flickering light of the angry mob's torches. The bayou, once a place of surreal charm, had become a crucible of fear and superstition, a place where even the most innocent of creatures could become the target of a vengeful, misguided mob. The dental dam, still a distant, pulsating beacon in the sky, seemed to mock their efforts, a silent, cosmic observer of the unfolding drama. To be continued, page Chapter 4, The Porcelain Colada and the Wooden Chain. The angry mob, a swirling vortex of fear and pitchforks, descended upon Janet's pond with the righteous indignation of 1,000 frustrated souls. Their torches cast flickering demonic shadows on the murky water, illuminating Janet, who had retreated to the deepest, darkest corner of her aquatic home. Her iridescent surface trembled, not just from fear, but from a profound, unsettling distress. The accusations, the shouts of witch and unnatural, echoed in her gelatinous form, causing her to ripple with a sorrowful vibration. "She's a menace, a blight upon our community," screamed a man, his face contorted with a mixture of terror and self-importance. He wielded a rusty crucifix like a weapon, its tarnished silver glinting ominously in the torchlight. Janet, overwhelmed, felt a familiar pressure building within her. With a sudden guttural gurgle, she burped up rosary beads, a cascade of pearlescent orbs that floated to the surface of the pond, shimmering with an ethereal glow. The mob recoiled, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated weirdness of the spectacle. It was a testament to the bayou's ability to constantly redefine the boundaries of the bizarre. Just as the mob seemed poised to surge forward, a commanding voice cut through the din, sharp and resonant, like a whip cracking in the night. "Enough!" Clotilde, the former nun, stood at the front lines of the mob, her figure silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. Her eyes, usually serene, now blazed with an almost divine fury. She wore her customary sensible shoes, but tonight they seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 sermons. "You fools! Do you truly believe that a creature of such innocent, albeit slimy, disposition could be responsible for the darkness that plagues our town? This is not the work of a pregnant slime troll, but of something far more insidious, something that preys upon your fear and ignorance." Her words, delivered with the precision of a seasoned orator, seemed to momentarily quell the mob's fervor. She spoke of divinity, of the sacred balance of the bayou, and of the dangers of succumbing to mass hysteria. She reminded them of the true enemy, the unseen forces that manipulated their fears, the puppet masters pulling the strings. The mob, though still agitated, began to disperse, their torches dimming, their shouts replaced by murmurs of uncertainty. Clotilde, with her unwavering conviction, had once again managed to pull Bayou Saint-Mere back from the brink of self-destruction. The next morning dawned foggy, a thick, ethereal mist clinging to the cypress trees and shrouding the blind school in an eerie, almost supernatural veil. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, crackling with an unspoken dread. Mr. Sukhamiddika, usually a paragon of peculiar calm, was seething. His chenille suit seemed to vibrate with suppressed fury, and his eyes, usually knowing, now burned with an incandescent rage. The cause of his ire? A student, a precocious young woman named Clementine, had been caught with a contraband item, a Braille edition of lesbian erotica, meticulously transcribed and hidden beneath her crib mattress. The headmistress, a stern woman with a penchant for rigid order, had presented the offending certificate of transgression to Mr. Sukhamiddika, expecting a calm, measured response. What she received instead was a terrifying display of raw, untamed power. This obscenity, Mr. Sukhamitika hissed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the school. This deviation from the curriculum. This pornography. As he spoke, the slamming doors shutting on their own throughout the school, echoing like gunshots in the hushed corridors. Books flew from shelves, windows rattled, and the very air crackled with an unseen energy. It was as if the school itself was recoiling from his wrath. Clementine, far from being intimidated, merely smirked, a defiant glint in her blind eyes. "It's called literature, Mr. Sukhamitika, and it's far more enlightening than your lectures on the theoretical physics of parallel dimensions." Mr. Sukhamitika's face contorted, his features shifting and blurring like a poorly rendered photograph. He began to expand, his form rippling and distorting, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. The headmistress shrieked, cowering behind her desk. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and acrid, like burnt sugar. It was the smell of pure, unadulterated rage, amplified by whatever bizarre entity now inhabited Mr. Sukhamitika's form. Youngblood, who had been observing the scene from the footlights of the school's small auditorium, felt a wave of euphoria mixed with terror. The sheer, unbridled power emanating from Sukhamitika was intoxicating, a dangerous, alluring force that threatened to consume everything in its path. It was a religious, sexy experience, a glimpse into the raw, untamed heart of the universe. She felt a strange kinship with Clementine, a shared defiance against the oppressive forces of conformity. The world, she realized, was a stage, and they were all merely players, caught in a cosmic drama of epic proportions. The repercussions of Sukhamitika's outburst rippled through Bayou Sang, mere like a psychic firestorm. At Cora's malt shop, Gumbo's precognitive wrists began to twitch uncontrollably, his hands flailing in a bizarre, involuntary dance. "The boom-boom!"
"I feel the boom-boom coming,"
he cried, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and prophetic insight. His kidney stone, pebbles, rattled in his pocket, emitting a series of frantic, high-pitched squeaks. "He's losing control. The dental dam is destabilizing. We're all doomed." King the snail, usually a creature of deliberate, almost glacial movement, suddenly began to race across the floor of the malt shop, leaving a shimmering, iridescent trail in his wake. He moved with the speed of a startled tarantula, his tiny antennae twitching frantically, as if sensing an impending catastrophe. He zipped past Ralph the parrot, who was in the midst of a particularly erudite monologue about igloos. And then, of course, Ralph squawked, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him, "You have the wooden chain igloo, a marvel of structural engineering, where interlocking wooden blocks create a surprisingly robust, albeit flammable, dwelling. And let us not forget the glass floor igloo, a truly visionary concept, allowing for unparalleled views of the frozen tundra beneath, though one must be mindful of the occasional polar bear peering up at one's nether regions." He paused, adjusting his stance on his perch. "But my personal favorite for its sheer audacity is the ragtop igloo, a collapsible, portable dwelling, perfect for the nomadic Eskimo who enjoys a brisk winter breeze through his... well, you get the idea." He cleared his throat, his beady eyes scanning the room. "And speaking of structural integrity, or lack thereof, I must say, the current state of affairs in Bayou Sang reminds me of a poorly constructed checkbook balance. All zeros, and a whole lot of overdraft fees." He then began to peck at a bowl of wasabi peas, his commentary punctuated by the sharp, spicy crunch. Meanwhile, the dental dam, still suspended in the sky, began to pulse with an alarming intensity, its eerie glow casting a sickly green light over the bayou. It was as if Sukhamitika's rage had somehow amplified its power, turning it into a beacon of cosmic instability. The guard rails of reality seemed to be bending, threatening to snap under the immense pressure. At the call center, where Clotilde worked tirelessly, fielding calls about misplaced shipments and existential dread, Janet the slime troll appeared, her form shimmering with an unprecedented agitation. She was no longer merely pregnant, she was a vessel of profound cosmic dread. Her surface rippled with dark, swirling patterns, and her normally serene eyes were wide with terror. "Clotilde," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural gurgle that resonated with an ancient fear. I think I'm pregnant with the Antichrist." Clotilde, who had seen her fair share of bizarre phenomena in Bayou Sang merely raised an eyebrow. "The Antichrist, you say?" And what, pray tell, makes you suspect such a distinguished lineage? Janet burped, and a single, perfectly formed porcelain colada glass floated to the surface of her gelatinous form, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. The dreams, Clotilde, the dreams of ticks and butterfly wings, of tiny, barbed hooks and iridescent scales. And the cravings.
Oh, the cravings.
For raw meat and the screams of the innocent. She shuddered, a wave of nausea passing through her. Clotilde, ever the pragmatist, considered this. Ticks and butterfly wings, a rather eclectic combination, and raw meat and screams of the innocent, a classic, if somewhat cliché, Antichrist diet. But tell me, my dear, have you considered a vaccination? Janet looked at her, bewildered. A vaccination? For the Antichrist? Indeed, Clotilde replied, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. One never knows. Perhaps a simple booster shot could alleviate some of these symptoms. She paused, then her expression grew serious. But in all seriousness, Janet, this is a matter of grave concern. We must keep this a secret. The town, in its current state of heightened anxiety, would not react favourably to such news. As Clotilde spoke, a strange sensation began to ripple through her. A lightness, a subtle upward pull. She felt her feet lift from the ground, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, until she was hovering a full 7 inches off the floor. Her eyes widened in surprise, but her expression remained remarkably calm. It was a spontaneous levitation, a manifestation of her own latent powers, perhaps amplified by the sheer absurdity of the situation. She looked at Janet, a knowing smile playing on her lips. It seems, my dear, that the bayou has a way of revealing its secrets, even to the most unsuspecting among us. Janet, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, could only gurgle in response. The secret of her pregnancy and Clotilde's newfound ability hung in the air, a delicate, dangerous balance. The dental dam pulsed in the sky, a silent, cosmic witness to the unfolding drama, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash between the mundane and the monstrous, between fear and the unknown. The fate of Janet and her unborn child hung precariously in the balance, illuminated by the flickering light of the angry mob's torches. The bayou, once a place of surreal charm, had become a crucible of fear and superstition, a place where even the most innocent of creatures could become the target of a vengeful, misguided mob. The dental dam, still a distant, pulsating beacon in the sky, seemed to mock their efforts, a silent, cosmic observer of the unfolding drama. To be continued. Chapter 5. The Chrysler Sebring and the Mohair Sofa. The mob, their torches flickering like angry fireflies, had been dispersed by Clotilde's unexpected display of divine authority. Yet, the seeds of suspicion, once sown, were difficult to uproot. The whispers, now amplified by the recent chaos at the blind school, began to coalesce around Janet, the slime troll. The Carolike incident, a grotesque ballet of telekinetic mayhem, was swiftly and unfairly laid at her gelatinous feet. The town, desperate for a tangible scapegoat, found one in the pregnant, amorphous creature of the pond. "It's her! It's the slime troll and her spawn," a voice shrieked, echoing the collective fear. "The Antichrist is coming, and she's carrying it." Janet, her iridescent surface trembling with a fear far deeper than any physical threat, knew she had to flee. The pond, once her sanctuary, had become a cage. With a desperate, silent plea to the benevolent forces of the bayou, she slithered away, leaving a shimmering trail of slime in her wake. Her destination, Dorothea's cabinet, a place of unexpected refuge, known only to a select few who understood the delicate balance between the mundane and the monstrous in Bayou Saint-Mere. It was a tight squeeze, a dark, enclosed space that smelled faintly of mothballs and old lace, but it was safe. For now. At the blind school, the annual talent contest, usually a charming, if somewhat predictable, affair of off-key singing and earnest poetry, had devolved into a spectacle of pure, unadulterated terror. The tension between Clementine, the Braille erotica enthusiast, and Mr. Sukhamidica, the perpetually enraged teacher, had reached a boiling point. The air in the auditorium crackled with an almost palpable electricity, a premonition of the impending disaster. Clementine, on stage, was performing a piece of interpretive dance, her movements fluid and graceful, yet imbued with a disturbing intensity. Her blind eyes, usually serene, now glowed with an unsettling inner light. As she reached the crescendo of her performance, a series of bizarre events began to unfold. The footlights exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the stage into momentary darkness. Then, with a deafening boom-boom, the stage curtains ripped themselves from their moorings, flapping wildly like monstrous wings. The audience shrieked, a collective gasp of terror and disbelief. Mr. Sukhamitika, seated in the front row, his face, a mask of barely contained fury, began to vibrate. His chenille suit shimmered, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. He was losing control, his bizarre transformation into a colossal dental dam having left him with a tenuous grip on his human form. The psychic backlash from Clementine's performance, a raw, untamed surge of telekinetic energy, was too much for him. He rose from his seat, his form elongating, distorting, his features blurring into an amorphous blob of rage. Suddenly, Clementine's eyes snapped open, a terrifying, incandescent glow emanating from their depths. She pointed a trembling finger at Mr. Sukhamitika and, with a guttural scream, unleashed a torrent of raw psychic power. The air filled with a cacophony of shattering glass, splintering wood, and the terrified screams of the audience. Chairs flew through the air, instruments exploded, and the very walls of the auditorium seemed to buckle under the immense pressure. It was a firestorm of pure, unadulterated chaos, a Carol-like nightmare brought to life. Youngblood, who had been watching from the wings, felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no ordinary tantrum, this was a manifestation of raw, untamed power, a psychic eruption that threatened to tear the school apart. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was somehow connected to Sukhamitika's transformation, to the dental dam still pulsing in the sky. This was the consequence of tampering with the delicate balance of the bayou, of unleashing forces best left undisturbed. Meanwhile, miles away, at a gas station on the outskirts of Bayou Saint-Mir, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. Sean, usually the bewildered pragmatist, was attempting to rob the place. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the ancient, rusty pistol, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit convenience store. The reason for this inexplicable behavior? A secret crack habit, a dark, insidious addiction that had been growing in the shadows, fueled by the surreal anxieties of Bayou Saint-Mir. He had been driving his beat-up ragtop, a Chrysler Sebring that had seen better days, its once gleaming paint now faded and peeling, a testament to his downward spiral. Just give me the money, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. All of it. The bewildered clerk, a young man with a perpetually bored expression, merely stared at him.
Dude, seriously? You're robbing a gas station with a toy gun?
And is that this hat? What even is that? Sean's face flushed with a mixture of shame and desperation. He knew he was making a fool of himself, but the craving, the insatiable hunger for another hit, was overwhelming. He felt like he was caught in a crapshoot, a desperate gamble with his own sanity. He needed money, and he needed it now. He had even considered going to the Double Down Casino in New Orleans, but his luck had been running as dry as the bayou in August. Suddenly, a flash of mint green caught his eye. A pristine 1957 mint green Ford Fairlane pulled up to the pumps, followed by a sleek, black 1967 Stingray, its chrome gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sean froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew those cars. They belonged to the twins, Randy and Raunchy, two notorious local drug dealers who were as flexible as they were hateful. This was not good. This was very, very not good. Back at the pale yellow house, Clotilde was experiencing a biological anomaly that defied all logic and reason. She was laying eggs. Small, pearlescent orbs, each about the size of a robin's egg, were emerging from her, one by one, with a disconcerting regularity. She had no idea why, or how, but the fact remained. Clotilde, the former nun, was now an oviparous being. She sat on her mohair sofa, a relic from a bygone era, surrounded by a growing clutch of eggs, her expression a mixture of alarm and profound bewilderment. "This is unexpected," she murmured to herself, picking up one of the eggs. It felt warm, almost alive, in her hand. She had always considered herself balanced, but this new development was throwing her entirely imbalanced. Suddenly, the mirror in the corner of the room shimmered, and the ethereal form of Concepcion appeared, her eyes wide with a dire warning. "Clotilde!"
"The eggs."
"They are not what they seem. There is a darkness within them, a shadow that grows with each passing moment. You must be careful." Concepcion's voice, usually calm and measured, was laced with an urgency that sent a chill down Clotilde's spine. Just then, Scott, the limitless, legless character, materialized beside her, his ethereal form shimmering like heat haze. He looked at the eggs, then at Clotilde, a strange, knowing smile playing on his lips. Ah, Clotilde. Always full of surprises. Though I must say, this is a rather unique development. Perhaps a new form of taxidermy, or a particularly elaborate dually. He chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. But seriously, my dear, Concepcion is right. There is something off about these, something that feels like a ticking clock, a crib of impending doom. Youngblood and Anna, having sensed the escalating chaos, converged at the blind school. Youngblood, now fully embracing her male identity, felt a surge of protective instinct. Anna, her healing powers still humming from her Kansas City ordeal, whinnied with determination. They were the unlikely heroes of this unfolding nightmare, a man who had once been a woman, and a tiny horse with cosmic abilities. They found Clementine, exhausted but triumphant, standing amidst the wreckage of the auditorium. Mr. Sukhamiddika was gone, his form having dissolved into a shimmering puddle of iridescent goo. The dental dam in the sky, however, pulsed with renewed vigor, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. The psychic energy unleashed by Clementine's performance had somehow amplified its power, making it even more menacing. As they surveyed the damage, a horrifying realization dawned on Youngblood. He remembered the faint, almost imperceptible tendrils that had descended from the dental dam, their subtle penetration into the earth. He remembered the bonfire coffin, the missing Lester, and the whispers about the pigs. And then he saw it. A tiny, almost invisible hole in the floorboards, beneath where Clementine had been dancing, and through that hole, a faint, almost imperceptible scent. The scent of pork and something else. Something metallic and sweet, like blood. He looked at Clementine, her face serene, almost angelic, amidst the destruction. And he knew. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the troublesome student at the blind school had not merely caused a psychic explosion. She had, in fact, been fed to the pigs at Lester's farm. The bonfire coffin, the missing Lester, the well-fed pigs it all clicked into place with a sickening thud. Clementine had been a sacrifice, a gruesome offering to the escalating weirdness of Bayou Sa-Mer, and the dental dam, still pulsing in the sky, was the silent, cosmic witness to her demise. Youngblood felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He wanted to scream, to expose the truth, but a paralyzing fear gripped him. Who would believe him? And what would be the consequences? He looked at Anna, her small frame trembling with an unspoken understanding. They were in this together, two unlikely heroes, in a world gone mad. The anxiety of that opening number on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where he always had to have his shoes changed and song finished at the same exact time, suddenly seemed like a quaint, almost comforting memory compared to the existential dread that now enveloped them. Meanwhile, in Clotilde's house, one of the pearlescent eggs began to glow with a faint, internal light, its surface rippling with an unseen energy. A tiny crack appeared, then another, spreading across its fragile shell like a spider web. Inside, something stirred, something ancient and powerful, waiting to be born. And only Clotilde, now hovering 7 inches off her mohair sofa, knew the terrifying truth. The Antichrist, or something far worse, was about to hatch. To be continued. Chapter 6. The Dune Buggy and the Mohair Sofa. Youngblood awoke with a start, a strange tingling sensation coursing through his limbs. The previous night's revelations, the sudden, undeniable shift in his identity, had left him feeling both liberated and profoundly disoriented. He ran a hand over his face, noting the faint stubble that had miraculously appeared overnight. His skin, usually prone to being ashy in the bayou humidity, felt strangely smooth, almost new. He reached for the bottle of personal lubricant he kept on his nightstand, a habit from his previous life, and paused. The thought of using it now felt alien, almost comical. This was a new body, a new self, and with it came a whole new set of sensations and anxieties. He swung his legs out of bed, his elbow cracking with a satisfying pop. The room, a small, sparsely furnished space he rented from Clotilde on the west side of town, seemed to hum with a new energy. He felt a sense of continuum, a free flow of consciousness that connected him to everything around him. It was a strange science, this sudden profound shift in his being, a testament to the bizarre, reality-bending properties of the bayou. He glanced at the small ceramic bowl on his dresser, where Clotilde had left him a special breakfast, a single pearlescent egg, still faintly glowing with an internal light. He picked it up, a strange hunger gnawing at his stomach. It looked innocuous enough, like a particularly large, oddly coloured robin's egg. He cracked it open, the shell surprisingly pliable, and swallowed the contents in one gulp. It tasted faintly of ozone and something else, something ancient and powerful. He felt a sudden surge of euphoria, a dizzying rush that made his head spin. He sprinkled a generous amount of gold bond powder on his chest, a new, almost instinctual gesture, and headed out. At Chaos's apartment, the air was thick with the bittersweet scent of impending departure. Baby Jermaine Jr., barely a year old, was being prepared for a temporary relocation to Idaho, a brief respite from the escalating weirdness of Bayou Saint-Mere. Chaos, his telekinetic eyebrow twitching with a mixture of sadness and relief, was packing a small dune buggy toy into a suitcase, alongside several packages of Pampers nappies.
"Say goodbye to Uncle Chaos, little man,"
Cora cooed, tickling baby Jermaine under the chin.
"You're going on a big adventure."
Baby Jermaine, usually content with gurgles and babbling, suddenly looked up at Chaos, his tiny face contorted in an expression of profound seriousness. Then, from his small, cherubic mouth, a voice boomed forth, deep and resonant, a voice that belonged to a man twice his size.
"Chaos.
You must tell Janet. She is not pregnant with the Antichrist. She is pregnant with his cousin. His name is Casey." Chaos froze, his jaw dropping. He stared at baby Jermaine, then at Cora, who looked equally stunned. Did he just...
"Casey,"
baby Jermaine repeated, his deep voice echoing in the small apartment.
"He is
different, more mellowed out, less hateful, but still cunning. He has a cunning nature." He then returned to his usual babbling, his tiny hands reaching for the dune buggy toy. The revelation hung in the air, a bizarre, unsettling truth that resolved one terrifying issue while simultaneously raising a whole new set of concerns. The Antichrist's cousin?
What did that even mean?
Chaos, still reeling, immediately sought out Janet. He found her still hiding in Dorothea's cabinet, her iridescent surface shimmering with anxiety. He relayed baby Germain's message, and Janet, after a moment of stunned silence, let out a gurgle of relief. Casey? Oh, thank the benevolent forces. I thought I was carrying the ultimate evil. A cousin. That's much more manageable. Perhaps he'll be into croquet. Meanwhile, Sean's secret crack habit had finally spiraled out of control, leading to devastating consequences. The attempted gas station robbery, though thwarted, had been the final straw. Cora, heartbroken and furious, had called off their impending wedding. The music shop, once a vibrant hub of sound and laughter, now felt heavy with unspoken grief. Sean, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow, wandered the aisles, a ghost in his own life. He looked at the records, the instruments, the memories of a future that would never be. His once flexible spirit had become rigid, imbalanced by the insidious grip of his addiction. Upstairs, in their apartment above the music shop, a strange phenomenon began to occur. Doors, unlatched and untouched, began to slam shut on their own. Lights flickered, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. It was as if the apartment itself was weeping, mourning the loss of a love that had once promised so much. The seductive glances of the crack pipe had stolen his future, leaving him with nothing but regret and the lingering taste of ash. That evening, a lavish spread, an elaborate dinner cooked by Dorothea, was served to all the main characters. The long dining table in the convent's main hall was laden with exotic dishes. Gar patties shimmering with an otherworldly glow, crappies baked in a delicate herb crust, and a rich, aromatic beet soup. The air was thick with the scent of spices and unspoken tension. The adults Gumbo, Youngblood, Loon, Merrick, Professor Voss, Clotilde, Dorothea, Sean, and Cora were seated at the main table, their faces grim, their conversation hushed. They discussed what needed to be done, the escalating weirdness of Bayou Saint Mere, the dental dam in the sky, Sukhamidica's unpredictable rage, and the new, unsettling revelation about Casey. At a smaller, child-sized table, set slightly apart, sat the kiddie table contingent: Anna, Janet, King the Snail, and Mindy the Talking Branch. Anna, her tiny hooves tapping impatiently, nibbled on a miniature carrot. Janet, her iridescent surface shimmering with a newfound maternal glow, gently cradled her belly. King the Snail, surprisingly agile, scampered across the table, leaving a faint, silvery trail. Mindy the Talking Branch, usually A. Fount of endless chatter, was unusually quiet, her leaves rustling with a nervous energy. Ralph the Parrot, however, was allowed to join the adults, perched regally on a candelabra in the center of the main table. He cleared his throat, his beady eyes scanning the room. And now, for a brief interlude, a moment of cultural commentary, if you will. We speak of chaos, of the unraveling of reality, but let us not forget the subtle artistry of the interlude. Take, for instance, the masterful album interludes of Janet Jackson. Not the bombastic, in-your-face tracks, but the quiet moments, the whispers, the fleeting glimpses into the artist's soul. They are the continuum, the free flow of emotion that binds the album together. They are the abracadabra, the secret word that unlocks the deeper meaning. They are the powder of life, the subtle magic that transforms the mundane into the extraordinary. They are the strange science of musical alchemy. They are the sympathy that connects us all. He paused, taking a dramatic sip of water from a tiny sippy cup that Dorothea had thoughtfully provided. And yet, these interludes, these moments of quiet reflection, are often overlooked, dismissed as mere filler. much like the subtle signs of impending doom that we, in our human folly, so often ignore. The Maldives are sinking, the sonic boom is upon us, and yet we concern ourselves with the trivialities of state-of-the-art Brotec and the price of wasabi peas. He then launched into a detailed, if somewhat rambling, analysis of Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation, 1814, interludes, much to the bewildered amusement of the adults and the quiet fascination of the kiddie table. As the dinner progressed, the conversation at the main table grew more intense. Professor Voss, his brow furrowed in thought, spoke of the dental dam in the sky, theorizing about its connection to Sukhumitica's true nature. Loon and Merrick, the museum curators, discussed ancient texts and forgotten lore, searching for clues. Gumbo, his precognitive wrists twitching, offered cryptic warnings. Clotilde, still faintly levitating, spoke of the eggs, her voice hushed with a mixture of awe and dread. Sean, his face a mask of despair, remained silent, his crack habit a gaping hole in his soul, a secret that threatened to consume him entirely. Youngblood, however, found his attention drawn to the kiddie table. He watched Janet, her hand resting protectively on her belly, and a chilling thought struck him. Casey, the Antichrist's cousin. What kind of being would emerge from that egg? He looked at Clotilde, who was now hovering a full 7 inches off her mohair sofa, her eyes fixed on him with a knowing intensity. He knew, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, that one of Clotilde's eggs, the one that had glowed with an internal light, was somehow connected to Casey. It was a transfusion, a perfusion of evil, a dark lineage that threatened to engulf them all. He wanted to speak, to warn them, but his voice caught in his throat. The revelation about Clementine, the Braille erotica student, still haunted him. He had seen the faint scent of pork, the metallic sweetness of blood, the chilling certainty that she had been fed to the pigs. He had kept that secret, a heavy burden on his soul, and now another secret, even darker, threatened to emerge. He looked at the egg, still faintly glowing, and a cold dread gripped him. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that something unspeakable was about to hatch. And he was the only one who knew the truth. To be continued. Chapter 7. The Hatching and the Heartbreak. The air in Clotilde's house was thick with anticipation, a palpable hum that vibrated through the very floorboards. Youngblood, still grappling with the strange new sensations of his transformed body, watched with a mixture of awe and dread as the glowing egg on the mohair sofa pulsed with an increasing intensity. Clotilde, hovering serenely 7 inches off the ground, her eyes fixed on the egg, murmured ancient incantations under her breath. The crack that had appeared earlier now spiderwebbed across the pearlescent shell, growing wider with each passing moment. Suddenly, with a soft pop, the egg fractured, and a shower of iridescent dust filled the air. Youngblood shielded his eyes, then peered through the shimmering haze. What emerged was not the grotesque monster he had half expected, nor the Antichrist's cousin, Casey. Instead, a tiny, perfectly formed dune buggy rolled out, no bigger than his thumb, its miniature wheels spinning silently. It was made of what appeared to be solid rose gold, and from its tiny, upholstered seat, a faint, almost imperceptible melody emanated, a tune that sounded vaguely like a lullaby played backward. It was bizarre, whimsical, and utterly unsettling. The little dune buggy, without a driver, began to navigate the contours of the mohair sofa, leaving a faint, shimmering trail in its wake. Clotilde descended gently to the floor, her levitation momentarily forgotten. She picked up the miniature vehicle, her expression a mixture of profound bewilderment and a strange, almost maternal pride. "Well," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "that's unexpected." Youngblood, his mind still reeling from the sight, felt a new wave of symptoms. The egg he had consumed for breakfast was working its strange magic. He found himself hearing the thoughts of inanimate objects, The creak of the floorboards complaining about their age, the hum of the refrigerator, lamenting its empty shelves, the mohair sofa sighing contentedly at the warmth of Clotald's touch. It was a cacophony of silent voices, a continuum of consciousness that threatened to overwhelm him. He also experienced brief, uncontrollable bursts of levitation, his feet lifting an inch or two off the ground before gravity reasserted its dominion. He struggled to hide these new abilities, to maintain a semblance of normalcy in a world that was rapidly unraveling. But the secret of Clementine's fate, the chilling certainty that she had been fed to the pigs, weighed heavily on his soul. He saw the faint scent of pork everywhere, heard the phantom squeals of the swine, and the metallic sweetness of blood seemed to cling to his tongue. He knew he should speak, should expose the truth, but a paralyzing fear gripped him. Who would believe him? And what would be the consequences? The dental dam, still pulsing ominously in the sky, seemed to mock his silence, a cosmic witness to his moral dilemma. At Cora's malt shop, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken grief. The cancelled wedding, a casualty of Sean's spiralling crack habit, had cast a pall over the usually bustling establishment. Cora, her face etched with a profound sadness, moved through the motions of her day, serving up Pop-Tarts and coffee with a mechanical efficiency. Her heart, once full of hope, now felt like a hollow ashtray, filled with the ashes of a dream. She had loved Sean, truly, deeply, but his addiction had become a gaping hole in their relationship, a chasm that swallowed everything in its path. Sean, meanwhile, had hit rock bottom. He wandered the streets of Bayou Saint-Mai, a ghost in his own life, his once vibrant spirit now put out to pasture. His crack habit had consumed him, leaving him gaunt, hollow-eyed, and utterly devoid of hope. He saw the pity in people's eyes, the whispers that followed him like a shadow. He was a cautionary tale, a testament to the destructive power of addiction. Gumbo, his precognitive wrists twitching with a desperate urgency, tried to intervene, offering cryptic warnings and ancient remedies. He spoke of strange science, of rituals that could cleanse the soul, but Sean merely shrugged, his eyes vacant. The addiction was too strong, a parasitic entity that had taken root deep within his being. Ralph the parrot, perched on his usual spot, offered his own unique brand of commentary. "Ah, love," he squawked, his voice dripping with a theatrical melancholy. A fleeting illusion, a fragile bloom, easily crushed by the heavy boot of reality, or, in this case, the insidious grip of a crack pipe. It reminds me of the great three-legged race of life, where one stumbles and falls, dragging one's partner down into the brambles of despair. He then launched into a surprisingly poignant rendition of a forgotten blues tune, his voice a gravelly lament that seemed to echo the collective sorrow of the malt shop. The town, still reeling from the mob incident and the flaming baby heads, demanded answers. The dental dam in the sky, a constant, unsettling reminder of Sukhamidica's bizarre transformation, pulsed with an almost malevolent energy. The whispers about Janet's pregnancy, about Casey, the Antichrist's cousin, grew louder, fueled by fear and superstition. The townspeople, their nerves frayed, their sanity stretched to its breaking point, were looking for someone to blame, someone to punish. And then, a new threat emerged, one that sent a fresh wave of pandemonium through Bayou Saint-Mai. The pigs from Lester's farm, now mutated by their gruesome diet, had broken loose. They were no longer mere swine, but monstrous, hulking beasts, their eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence, their snouts dripping with a viscous, dark fluid. They rampaged through the streets, overturning stalls, terrorizing pedestrians, their guttural grunts echoing like thunder. It was a scene of utter pandemonium, a primal scream against the encroaching madness. Youngblood, his new abilities still manifesting in unpredictable ways, found himself drawn to the chaos. He saw the fear in the townspeople's eyes, the desperate scramble for safety. He knew he had to act, to use his newfound powers for good. He focused, his mind reaching out, trying to connect with the rampaging beasts. He felt a surge of energy, a free flow of power, and for a fleeting moment he thought he could control them, could calm their savage rage. But the connection was tenuous, the power overwhelming. As the mutated pigs continued their rampage, a chilling realization dawned on Youngblood. The little rose gold dune buggy, the one that had hatched from Clotel's egg, was somehow connected to the pigs. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer around the lead pig, a resonance that matched the tiny vehicle's ethereal glow. It was a transfusion, a perfusion of energy, a dark symbiosis that linked the innocent-looking toy to the monstrous beasts. The egg, he realized, was not just a bizarre curiosity. It was a catalyst, a trigger for a new, terrifying chapter in the unfolding saga of Bayou Saint-Mere. The lead pig, its eyes glowing with an unholy light, suddenly stopped, its massive head turning towards Youngblood. It let out a guttural grunt, a sound that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. And then it charged, its mutated form a terrifying blur of muscle and tusks. Youngblood stood his ground, his hands outstretched, a desperate plea for control, for understanding. The fate of Bayou Saint-Mere, and perhaps his own sanity, hung precariously in the balance, illuminated by the eerie glow of the dental dam in the sky and the monstrous charge of the mutated pig. To be continued. Chapter 8. The Smegma and the Tiffany Lamp, Expanded Edition. The convent grounds, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation and the gentle rustle of rosary beads, had been violently transmuted into a porcine battleground. The lingering bayou mist, thick and cloying, struggled to part for the nascent dawn, lending an ethereal, almost spectral quality to the unfolding horror. 12 ravenous, mutated pigs, their eyes glowing with a malevolent, almost sentient pink eye, charged across the manicured lawns. Their guttural grunts, once the simple sounds of farm animals, now resonated with a chilling, strategic cadence, echoing like the death knell of sanity itself. The lead pig, its massive head swiveling with an unnerving intelligence, its hide still faintly shimmering with the rose-gold energy of the dune buggy, seemed to be orchestrating the attack, a porcine general leading its grotesque army. These were not mere swine. These were agents of chaos, their very presence, a malignancy on the serene landscape, a living, snorting affront to all that was holy. Sister Mary Margaret, a woman whose life had been a delicate tapestry woven with threads of quiet devotion, the intricate art of needlepoint, and a surprisingly robust academic interest in the socio-political structures of ancient Rome, was the first to fall. She had been tending her prize-winning petunias, a vibrant splash of fuchsia against the convent's austere grey, when the pigs descended. A blur of tusks and snorts, a whirlwind of mud and muscle. Her last thought, as a particularly large sow, whose jowls wobbled with a disturbing resemblance to man-boobs, delivered a brutal chokehold to her slender frame, was not of salvation, nor of the impending judgment, but of the profound injustice of her petunias being utterly, irrevocably trampled. The scent of crushed petals mingled with the earthy, unsettling aroma of smegma that seemed to emanate from the beasts, a primal, unholy perfume. Her delicate silver crucifix, a cherished heirloom, was torn from her neck, lost in the churned earth, a tiny, forgotten testament to a faith now violently interrupted. The pigs, with a horrifying efficiency, left behind only a single mud-splattered rosary bead, a faint, lingering scent of the unholy, and the unsettling impression of a human sacrifice offered to the new, porcine gods of the bayou. Sister Agnes, a woman of robust constitution, a booming laugh, and a surprisingly earthy sense of humour that often manifested in colourful, albeit sacrilegious, metaphors, fared little better. She had been in the midst of a particularly vigorous session of Ouija boarding with a group of novitiates, attempting to contact the spirit of a particularly mischievous patron saint when the pigs burst through the chapel doors. Her initial reaction was not fear, but outrage. "You porcine scoundrels," she bellowed, wielding a heavy brass candelabra like a mace. "Get out of my chapel! This is not a livery stable." She launched herself at the lead pig, shouting expletives that would have made a sailor blush, her spirit a fiery beacon against the encroaching darkness. But the pigs, fueled by their gruesome diet of, well, best not to dwell on the specifics, were impervious to both divine wrath and colourful language. They swarmed her, their sheer mass overwhelming her spirited defence. Her last defiant act was to kick a particularly obnoxious pig squarely in its pinky finger-like hoof, eliciting a surprisingly human squeal of pain. They devoured her with a horrifying efficiency, leaving behind only a single mud-splattered rosary bead and a faint, lingering scent of the unholy. The convent, once a bastion of peace, was now a testament to the brutal, absurd reality of Bayou Saint-Mere. Dorothea, Clotilde, Gumbo, and King the Snail, witnessing the carnage from afar, their faces pale with a mixture of terror and disbelief, scrambled for cover. Their destination: the rickety workshop building at the back east corner of the convent grounds, a dilapidated structure that housed forgotten tools, broken statues, and the occasional stray cat called Meat. It was a desperate dash, a frantic three-legged race against porcine terror, their limbs flailing, their hearts pounding like tribal drums. The pigs, however, were fast, their mutated forms surprisingly agile, their transfiguration into instruments of chaos complete. They herded the quartet into the workshop, their grunts echoing with a triumphant, bloodthirsty glee, a sound that promised a feast. Inside, the workshop was a chaotic jumble of forgotten relics and discarded dreams. A rusted Jaguar on blocks in the driveway outside, its once sleek lines now a testament to decay, seemed to mock their predicament, its empty engine bay a gaping maw of despair. A skeletal 1986 Chevy Cavalier sat forlornly in a corner, its windows shattered, its interior a haven for spiders and the ghosts of forgotten road trips. The air was thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and rotten food. A half-eaten French bread baguette, green with mould, lay on a workbench, a testament to the workshop's long-abandoned state. Dorothea, ever the pragmatist, her usually impeccable French braids now coming undone, immediately began to barricade the flimsy door with whatever she could find: old planks, broken chairs, a stack of dusty findings from some long-forgotten archaeological dig, and a surprisingly sturdy pool table's leg. Clotilde, her levitation temporarily forgotten in the face of imminent danger, chanted prayers, her voice a low, rhythmic hum, a desperate plea to a seemingly indifferent heaven. Gumbo, his precognitive wrists twitching uncontrollably, nervously picked at his navel lint, his eyes wide with terror, a faint sheen of sweat on his beer belly. King the Snail, surprisingly, seemed to be enjoying the thrill of the chase, his tiny antennae twitching with excitement, leaving a shimmering trail of slime on the dusty floor. He was a creature of pure, unadulterated ID, unburdened by the complexities of human fear. The pigs, however, were relentless. They slammed their massive bodies against the door, their grunts shaking the very bindings and corners of the rickety building. The flimsy barricade groaned under the assault, splinters flying like shrapnel. Dorothea, her face streaked with sweat and grime, peered through a crack in the wall. "They're like a passion play gone horribly wrong," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "A human sacrifice in the making. And I don't think I'm ready for my close-up." She imagined the tumbler of red wine, a single, perfect glass, to calm her frayed nerves. But alas, only dust and despair were on offer. Clotilde, meanwhile, was having an internal monologue about the futility of faith in the face of such primal, unholy aggression. She recalled a particularly memorable incident involving a priest drunk during Mass, and wondered if perhaps a little spiritual lubrication might have helped him, and them, in this moment of crisis. The pig's eyes, she noted, were not just pink, but seemed to hold a deep, ancient malevolence, a malignancy that transcended mere animalistic hunger. She wondered if they had somehow acquired a shock collar of dark energy, binding them to Sukhamiddika's will. Outside, Anar, Chaos, and Youngblood tried desperately to intervene. Anar's magical powers for good and healing, usually so potent, seemed to have no effect on the mutated beasts. Her gentle whinnies of encouragement were met with aggressive snorts and a dismissive flick of a pig's big toe-like hoof. Chaos, his telekinetic abilities, usually capable of moving mountains, found his powers strangely muted, as if the pigs were somehow shielded by an unseen force, a psychic feeder road that diverted his energy. Youngblood, still grappling with his own bizarre transformation, his skin now strangely smooth and devoid of skin tags, tried to project a calming influence, a soothing mental balm, but the pigs merely snorted in derision, their disfigurement a testament to their new, terrifying nature. The dental dam in the sky pulsed with an almost mocking indifference, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the frantic scene, a cosmic Tiffany lamp illuminating their despair. Youngblood, in a moment of desperate clarity, wondered if there were secret tunnels beneath the convent, a hidden escape route. But his new, heightened senses only picked up the scent of fear and the metallic tang of blood. Meanwhile, back in Dorothea's cabinet, a space that now felt less like a refuge and more like a claustrophobic confessional, Janet the slime troll was in the throes of a desperate crisis. The revelation that she was carrying Casey, the Antichrist's cousin, had sent her into a spiral of fear and self-loathing. She had found a stash of methamphetamine, left behind by a previous, less savory occupant of the cabinet, and was attempting to induce a miscarriage. The acrid smell of burning chemicals filled the confined space, mingling with the faint scent of mothballs and the lingering aroma of desperation. Her iridescent surface, usually so serene, was now a chaotic swirl of dark, angry colors, like a disturbed oil slick. She was terrified, not just for herself, but for the potential evil she carried within her. It was a breech birth of the soul, a desperate attempt to abort a destiny she couldn't comprehend, a desperate exorcism of her own fears. "No! Janet, stop!" a voice squawked, sharp and insistent, cutting through the haze of her despair. Ralph the parrot, having sensed her distress, with an almost preternatural intuition, had somehow squeezed himself into the cabinet, his feathers ruffled with concern, his beady eyes reflecting the flickering light of her self-destruction. "This is not the way. This is not the agreement. You cannot fight darkness with more darkness. You're acting like a motivational speaker who's lost his way, a stand-up comment that falls flat." Janet looked at him, her eyes wide and unfocused, her gelatinous form trembling. "But Ralph!" "It's the Antichrist's cousin? What if he's even worse? What if he's a scoundrel? What if he's into Ouija boarding? What if he's a Ford man?" Ralph perched on a discarded Tiffany lamp, its stained glass shade casting a kaleidoscope of colors on Janet's trembling form, transforming her into a living, breathing, abstract art piece. "Listen to me, Janet. Listen to the wisdom of the ages. The wisdom of the 1970s soft rock, Mexican border, high tide sunrise, and even tide CD single. Life, my dear, is a stand-up comment, a cosmic joke, a beautiful, terrifying passion play. You cannot control the tides of fate, but you can choose how you ride the waves. This child, Casey, he is a part of you, a part of the bayou. He is a new beginning, a transfiguration, not a malignancy. And besides," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his tone shifting from profound to practical, methamphetamine is terrible for your complexion, and it gives you pinky finger cramps, and it makes your big toe ache. Trust me on this. I once knew a parrot who dabbled, and he ended up with a permanent case of pink eye and a penchant for wearing a studded belt from the 90s. His words, absurd yet strangely comforting, slowly began to penetrate Janet's drug-addled haze. She looked at the meth pipe, then at Ralph, then at her shimmering belly. A tear, thick and viscous, rolled down her iridescent surface, leaving a shimmering trail. Ralph, with his unique blend of wisdom and absurdity, had talked her out of it, pulling her back from the brink of self-destruction with a feathered, philosophical chokehold. He then launched into a surprisingly profound monologue about the life and career of 1930s actress Margaret Hamilton, drawing parallels between her iconic portrayal of the Wicked Witch of the West and Janet's current predicament. She was misunderstood, Janet. Feared, reviled, but ultimately she was just a woman trying to make her way in a world that didn't understand her. Just like you.
You are not evil, Janet.
You are life. You are the feeder road to a new future. A future that might involve a little French bread and some lovely French braids for your offspring. Think of the possibilities. Think of the joy. Think of the sheer, unadulterated chaos a well-adjusted Antichrist's cousin could bring to a dull Tuesday afternoon. His impassioned speech, delivered with the dramatic flair of a seasoned performer, resonated deep within Janet's core, a strange blend of theatricality and genuine concern. Back at the workshop, the pigs were close to breaching the door. The flimsy barricade groaned, threatening to give way at any moment. Dorothea, Clotilde, and Gumbo braced themselves, preparing for the inevitable, their faces grim, their hearts pounding. King the Snail, however, had a different idea. He slithered towards a corner of the workshop where a collection of old brooms and mops lay discarded, a forgotten arsenal of domesticity. He nudged a particularly long, sturdy branch with his antennae, and to everyone's astonishment, the branch began to move. It was Mindy the talking branch, her leaves rustling with a fierce determination, her wooden form radiating a quiet strength. "Get away from my friends, you porcine scoundrels!" Mindy shrieked, her voice surprisingly strong, a verdant battle cry. She swung the branch with surprising force, striking the lead pig squarely on its snout. The pig squealed, momentarily stunned, its pink eye widening in surprise. Mindy, emboldened, continued her assault, beating the pigs with a ferocity that belied her delicate nature. She struck them on their big toe-like hooves, their beer-belly bellies, their man-boobs-like jowls. She was a whirlwind of leafy fury, a botanical warrior against the forces of chaos, a living, breathing passion play of defiance. Her movements were a blur, a frantic dance of self-sacrifice, her branches a blur of green and brown against the grey of the workshop. She was a force of nature, a testament to the unexpected heroism that could emerge from the most unassuming of forms. The pigs, though surprised, were not easily deterred. They retaliated with savage bites and powerful headbutts, their grunts now laced with a new, furious intensity. Mindy fought valiantly, her wooden form creaking under the strain, but she was no match for their brute strength. With a final, desperate swing, she struck two of the pigs across their faces, leaving deep gashes, their skin tags flapping wildly. The pigs, now madder than ever, their pink eye glowing with a vengeful fury, but also seriously injured, let out a frustrated squeal, and for some inexplicable reason, turned and fled, scampering into the forest, leaving behind a trail of blood, shattered wood, and the lingering scent of rotten food. They were gone, but not defeated. Their retreat was a strategic withdrawal, not a surrender. Dorothea, Clotilde, and Gumbo rushed to Mindy's side. She lay broken and still, her leaves withered, her branches splintered, her once vibrant green, now a dull, lifeless brown. Her sacrifice had saved them, but at a terrible cost. "Mindy," Gumbo whispered, tears streaming down his face, his beer belly trembling with grief. She was so grateful, so full of life. Now she's put out to pasture. Clotilde, her voice choked with emotion, picked up a small, charred piece of Mindy's branch.
"She was a true hero,"
she said, her eyes filled with a profound sadness, her voice a low, mournful hum. A testament to the cunning nature of life, even in its most unexpected forms. Her sacrifice will not be in vain. She held the splintered branch like a sacred relic, a tangible reminder of the cost of their survival. The workshop was silent, save for the distant grunts of the retreating pigs and the gentle creak of the dental dam in the sky. They had survived, but the cost had been immense. The convent grounds were in ruins, 2 nuns were gone, and Mindy, the talking branch, was no more. The battle was over, but the war for Bayou Saint-Mere was far from it. The pigs, though injured, were still out there, and the mystery of their mutation, and their connection to the rose-gold dune buggy, remained unsolved. The dental dam pulsed, a silent cosmic witness to the unfolding drama, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the devastated convent grounds, a celestial Tiffany lamp illuminating their despair. The sun, now fully risen, cast a harsh, unforgiving light on the scene, a stark contrast to the soft, ethereal glow of the 1970s soft rock, Mexican border high-tide sunrise, and eventide CD single that Ralph had so eloquently described. The air, once thick with the scent of petunias and piety, now reeked of blood, fear, and the lingering, unsettling aroma of smegma. The absurdity of it all was almost overwhelming, a comedic tragedy played out on the grand stage of the bayou. And somewhere, in the depths of the forest, the pigs plotted their next move, their pink eye glowing with a renewed, vengeful fury. To be continued. Chapter 9. The Chihuahua Rice Pudding and the Vintage Nativity. The bayou, ever a crucible of the bizarre, had begun to simmer with a new, particularly potent brew of rumour and malevolence. The pig attack, the tragic demise of Mindy, and the unsettling presence of the dental dam in the sky had frayed the town's already thin nerves. But it was the whispers, insidious and pervasive, that truly began to unravel the fragile fabric of Bayou Saint-Mere. The most potent of these whispers, a particularly juicy one for a very juicy reason, claimed that Sean, in the throes of a crack-fueled binge, was the father of Janet, the slime troll's mysteriously conceived baby. The rumour, of course, was not true. Sean, despite his recent descent into addiction, had never been intimate with Janet, nor had he ever possessed the peculiar anatomical flexibility required for such an improbable liaison. Yet, truth was a malleable thing in Bayou Saint-Mere, easily bent and twisted by the winds of fear and prejudice. The town, already a hotbed of suspicion and malevolence, seized upon this narrative with a ravenous hunger. Sean, the once charming, if somewhat bewildered, proprietor of the music shop, became the new whipping boy, a convenient scapegoat for the collective anxieties of a populace teetering on the brink of sanity. The whispers grew into shouts, the shouts into demands for justice. Sean, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow from his addiction, found himself a pariah, his name spat with venom. He was no longer just a crack addict, he was a monster, a defiler of the innocent, a harbinger of the Antichrist's cousin. The dastardly accusations, though entirely fake, were deemed reasonable by a town desperate for answers, however outlandish. He had to run. He had to escape the suffocating embrace of their judgment, the relentless pursuit of their revering hatred. As if to underscore the escalating absurdity, a new, even more bizarre phenomenon began to manifest among the men of Bayou Saint-Mere. Small, fleshy tails, ranging in length from a mere nub to a disconcerting 6 inches, began to sprout from their lower backs. These caudal appendages were a study in grotesque diversity. Some were historical, reminiscent of ancient, forgotten species, while others were surprisingly able-bodied, twitching with an almost independent life. Many were bitter, a dark, angry red, while others were tough, covered in a leathery hide. There were moist ones, glistening with an unidentifiable secretion, and round ones, perfectly spherical and surprisingly firm. Some were baked, as if scorched by an internal fire, while others were tarnished, a dull metallic grey. A few were even offered for sale at the local farmers' market, alongside organic kale and artisanal cheeses, a testament to the town's ability to commodify even its most grotesque afflictions. There were mouldy tails, covered in a fine green fuzz, and average ones, utterly unremarkable in their abnormality. The mass of these tails varied wildly, some barely perceptible, others a considerable burden. They were both separate and attached, a paradox of biology. Some were tender, dry and brittle, while others were numb, completely devoid of sensation. There were young tails, barely emerging, and damp ones, perpetually slick. The sight of these festering appendages, a tremendous and astonishing display of biological whimsy, was both whimsical and deeply unsettling. It was an ill-advised biological experiment, a terrific and marvelous display of the bayou's ability to defy all known laws of nature. It was a soul-stirring and utterly insane development, a hot topic of conversation, a tilted reality, a tall tale come to life, a mysterious and listless affliction that defied all medical explanation. The men, initially horrified, soon adapted, some even attempting to incorporate their new appendages into their daily lives, using them to balance trays or swat at particularly aggressive mosquitoes. It was a testament to the human and male capacity for adaptation, even in the face of the utterly absurd. Sean, feeling like a hunted animal, fled into the treacherous embrace of the bayou. The marsh swallowed his footsteps, the swamp concealed his movements, and the dense foliage of the moss-whispering trees seemed to offer both solace and surveillance. He was on the run, a fugitive from a rumour, his only companion the gnawing hunger of his addiction and the relentless pursuit of his own despair. He navigated the treacherous terrain, his body aching from the exertion, his mind a whirlwind of self-recrimination. He felt broken, his body and soul fractured by the weight of his choices. He stumbled through the igloo wasteland of the cypress knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was a tracer in his own life, a phantom, a shadow of the man he once was. He passed a dilapidated fortress of corrugated tin and rusted metal, a relic of some forgotten bayou eccentric, its walls covered in faded tapestry of peeling paint. He saw a help-wanted sign nailed to a rotting tree, its faded letters promising a future he could no longer imagine. He even spotted a discarded golf cart, half submerged in the murky water, its once pristine white now tarnished with algae and mud, a symbol of forgotten leisure. His journey was a blur of frantic activity. He found himself nibbling on wild berries, their tart sweetness a momentary distraction from his hunger. He saw children dribbling a deflated basketball down a dirt road, their laughter a painful reminder of his lost innocence. He watched an old woman scribbling furiously in a notebook, her face a mask of intense concentration. He felt a desperate need to be revitalized, to shed the skin of his addiction, to silence the voices criticizing him from within. He heard the distant sound of a preacher dictating fire and brimstone from a makeshift pulpit, his words echoing across the water. He saw teenagers parading on the bleachers of a deserted baseball field, their youthful exuberance a stark contrast to his own despair. He felt himself trembling with a mixture of fear and withdrawal, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He was underestimating the power of his addiction, the insidious grip it had on his body and soul. He found himself vouching for his own innocence to the whispering moss, to the silent trees, to the indifferent sky. He felt the weight of his past wearing him down, the constant struggle of weaning himself off the drug. He heard the distant yowling of a stray cat, a mournful sound that mirrored his own internal anguish. He felt himself zooming through the landscape, a blur of desperation. He found himself nudging aside thick clumps of moss, whispering secrets he couldn't quite decipher. He was inquiring of the silent trees, of the murky water, of the indifferent sky, for answers he couldn't find. He saw a group of men street fighting over a discarded bottle, their primal rage a reflection of his own inner turmoil. He felt an aching in his bones, a deep, pervasive weariness. He heard the distant babbling of a brook, a soothing sound that offered no solace. He saw a group of children chuckling as they played a game of tetherball, their innocence, a painful contrast to his own corrupted reality. He heard the distant yelling of a frustrated parent, a sound that grated on his already frayed nerves. He felt himself soaking in the humid air, his clothes clinging to his skin. He desperately needed a tip line, a lifeline, a way out of this self-made prison. He yearned for a taste of tepid water, a simple, clean refreshment, but all he found was the brackish taste of despair. He saw a faded print of a bone on a discarded poster, a stark reminder of his own mortality. He saw a group of children playing a game of fantasy football, their innocent dreams a painful contrast to his own shattered reality. He felt like a pig-style factory system, a cog in a machine of his own making, churning out misery and despair. He was a rodeo clown, performing for an audience of his own demons. He was actually losing his mind, a figure of his own imagination. He was a neverland of broken dreams, a forgotten elevator to nowhere. He was a tracer package, lost in transit, never to reach its destination. The climax, as all good climaxes must, unfolded on the levee, a man-made ridge of earth that held back the encroaching waters of the bayou. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying vegetation, and the metallic tang of impending doom. A full moon, hot and tilted in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and menacing. The scene was set for a confrontation, a collision of fate and folly, a truly tremendous and astonishing spectacle. Sean, his clothes torn, his body bruised, found himself cornered. The mob, a swirling vortex of fear and righteous indignation, had finally caught up to him. They were led by a particularly zealous individual, a self-proclaimed moral guardian who wielded a shotgun with the conviction of a zealot. The mob, their faces contorted with a mixture of suspicion and malevolence, surrounded him, their shouts echoing across the water. They were a mass of humanity, their individual identities subsumed by the collective rage. They were separate yet attached, bound by their shared hatred. They were tinder, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. They were numb to reason, deaf to logic. They were young and old, damp with sweat and fear. They were festering with resentment, their anger a tremendous force. They were an astonishing display of human folly, a whimsical and ill-advised pursuit of vengeance. They were a terrific and marvelous spectacle, a soul-stirring display of mob mentality. They were insane, their actions driven by a collective madness. They were hot with anger, their blood boiling. They were tilted towards violence, their moral compasses askew. They were tall in their self-righteousness, their egos inflated. They were mysterious in their motivations, their individual reasons lost in the collective. They were listless in their pursuit of justice, their energy fueled by hatred. They were break-dancing with rage, their movements erratic and violent. They were yellow with fear, their courage replaced by cowardice. They were jaunty in their cruelty, their actions performed with a perverse glee. They were alienating in their judgment, their condemnation absolute. They were chewing on rumors, their teeth gnashing. They were dreaming of vengeance, their sleep disturbed. They were elevating their own righteousness, their moral high ground unassailable. They were rummaging through Sean's past, searching for more dirt. They were fumigating the town with their hatred, their words toxic. They were growling with rage, their voices guttural. They were hesitating only for a moment, their resolve unwavering. They were mediating their own justice, their judgment final. They were operating under a delusion, their perception skewed. They were parading their righteousness, their virtue performative. They were quibbling over minor details, their arguments petty. They were reveling in his downfall, their joy sadistic. They were stepping on his dignity, their boots crushing. They were trembling with anticipation, their bodies shaking. They were underestimating his despair, his capacity for self-destruction. They were vouching for each other's lies, their solidarity absolute. They were wearing their hatred like a badge of honor, their faces contorted. They were weaning themselves off reason, their minds clouded. They were yowling with rage, their voices piercing. They were zooming in on his flaws, their focus narrow. They were nudging each other, egging each other on. They were inquiring about his past, their curiosity morbid. They were street fighting for their beliefs, their fists clenched. They were aching for retribution, their desires primal. They were babbling incoherently, their words meaningless. They were chuckling at his misfortune, their laughter cruel. They were Winstoning their way through the night, their cigarettes glowing. They were yelling at the top of their lungs, their voices hoarse. They were soaking in the atmosphere of hatred, their souls stained. They were a tip line of gossip, their words spreading like wildfire. They were an igloo wasteland of empathy, their hearts frozen. They were tepid water of justice, their actions lukewarm. They were a hint of something darker, a print of evil. They were a bone to pick, their grievances endless. They were pig-style in their behavior, their actions brutish. They were a factory system of hatred, churning out venom. They were a rodeo of chaos, their movements wild. They were actually terrifying, a figure of nightmares. They were a neverland of reason, their minds lost. They were an elevator to hell, their descent ragged. They were a tapestry of malice, their threads interwoven. They were a fortress of ignorance, their walls impenetrable. They were a tracer package, delivering destruction. They were tetherball of his fate, batting him back and forth. They were fantasy football of his life, playing with his destiny. "You're a monster, Sean," the zealot screamed, his voice cracking with self-righteous fury. "A défiler," a crack-addled fiend who would impregnate a slime troll with the Antichrist's cousin. He raised the shotgun, its barrel glinting menacingly in the moonlight. Sean, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, almost detached amusement, looked at the mob, then at the shotgun, then at the zealot's gaping mouth. A single absurd thought flashed through his mind. This is it. This is how it ends. With a fruit, melon in my orifice. He had seen stranger things in Bayou Saint Mere. Just then, a vintage nativity scene, a cherished heirloom from the convent, rolled precariously close to the edge of the levee, dislodged by the commotion. The ceramic figures, chipped and faded, seemed to stare at the unfolding drama with silent, painted eyes. The baby Jesus, his tiny arms outstretched, seemed to offer a silent plea for peace. The three wise men, their gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, seemed to mock the earthly squabbles. The shepherds, their sheep huddled close, seemed to cower in fear. The angels, their wings chipped, seemed to weep silent tears. It was a tableau of profound irony, a sacred scene juxtaposed against the profane chaos. Sean, in a moment of pure, unadulterated desperation, saw his chance. As the zealot's finger tightened on the trigger, Sean lunged, not at the man, but at the melon. He grabbed the fruit melon, a perfectly ripe cantaloupe, and with a strength born of desperation, shoved it into the barrel of the shotgun. The zealot, startled, pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared, the melon exploded in a shower of pulp and seeds, and the force of the blast sent the zealot tumbling backward, his face covered in sticky cantaloupe guts. The mob recoiled, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation. In the ensuing chaos, Sean scrambled away, disappearing into the dense foliage of the bayou. He was free for now, a fugitive from a rumor, his life saved by a fruit melon and a moment of inspired lunacy. The mob, covered in cantaloupe, their righteous fury momentarily deflated, stared at the vintage nativity scene, its ceramic figures now splattered with fruit pulp, a silent, absurd witness to the night's events. The baby Jesus, his face covered in cantaloupe, seemed to be chuckling. The dental dam in the sky pulsed, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the levee, a cosmic spotlight on the unfolding drama. The bayou, ever a stage for the bizarre, had once again delivered a performance that defied all expectations. To be continued. Chapter 10. The Convergence and the Calamine Lotion. The levee, moments after the pulverizing explosion of the fruit melon, was a tableau of profound, sticky confusion. The mob, their faces dripping with cantaloupe guts and their righteous fury momentarily derailed, stood dumbfounded. The zealot, his shotgun now a sticky, useless tube, wiped a seed from his eye, his expression a mixture of shock and resentment. The vintage nativity scene, splattered with the collateral damage of Sean's desperate escape, seemed to offer a silent, ceramic judgment. The baby Jesus, still seemingly chuckling beneath a layer of pulp, was a testament to the hilarious absurdity of the situation. The mob, their bandwidth broken, began to disperse, slipping away into the foggy night, their footsteps heavy with the realization that they had been outsmarted by a crack addict and a piece of produce. They were unconcerned with justice. Now they just wanted to wash the sticky, sweet-smelling residue from their skin. Youngblood, who had watched the entire spectacle from the shadows of a nearby cypress tree, felt a small moment of inner panic subside, replaced by a profound weariness. He stepped out, his new, sealed skin prickling in the humid air. He was joined shortly by Clotilde, who descended gracefully from her levitation, and Professor Voss, who had been observing the mob's dynamics with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a particularly aggressive tribe of Martian primates.
"Well,"
Professor Voss said, adjusting his spectacles, "that was certainly... Though I must say, the use of a melon as a ballistic deterrent is a paradigm shift I hadn't anticipated." Clotilde sighed, smoothing her sensible skirt. "The bayou is a pressure cooker of unseen currents, Professor. We are merely the vegetables bobbing in the stew. But we cannot continue like this. We need a cram session. We need to understand what is happening before this town tears itself apart." They retreated to Clotilde's house, a serene place of healing amidst the chaos, though currently serving as a severe place of learning. They gathered around the most-hair sofa, which was, in fact, a mohair sofa, but Ralph the parrot had insisted on the misnomer, and it had stuck. Clotilde poured them each a glass of sweet tea, the condensation beading on the glass like sweat on a nervous bookie. Youngblood, feeling a sudden, inexplicable itch on his newly smooth arm, applied a generous dab of calamine lotion, the pink, chalky substance, a stark contrast to his dark skin. "All right," Professor Voss began, his voice taking on the confident, measured tone of a man accustomed to dictating lectures to listless students. "Let us examine the facts. We have a series of seemingly random events. Mr. Sukhomidika's transformation, the appearance of the dental dam, the mutated pigs, and Clotilde's oviparous anomaly. To the untrained eye, this is mere chaos. But I propose a grand unification theory of Bayou Sang. Mere. He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us rewind. We must look to the past for future reference. Remember the 2 attempts on human experimentation by Bixby in the late 80s? The ones that resulted in the town's brief, allergic reaction to the colour mauve, or the 2 public lewdness charges against Professor Brigsby, which were later revealed to be a complex, albeit disgraceful, ritual involving a tramp stamp and a jar of nut but honey. These were not isolated incidents. They were tremors, early warnings of the bayou's underlying instability. He paused, sipping his sweet tea. The bayou is not just a swamp, it is a psychic sponge. It absorbs our fears, our desires, our very body and soul. And recently it has reached a saturation point. The catalyst? Janet the slime troll. Youngblood leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Janet? But she's just with child. Or, well, with Casey. Exactly, Voss said, nodding solemnly. The conception of Casey, the Antichrist's cousin, was a psychic shockwave. It disrupted the delicate balance. The dental dam in the sky. It is not a weapon, it is a containment field, a desperate attempt by the bayou to quarantine the escalating weirdness. It is a psychic seatbelt, trying to prevent a cosmic whiplash. Clotilde gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. And Sukhamidica? Sukhamidica, Voss continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, was the pressure valve. His tenure at the blind school, a place of heightened sensory perception, made him uniquely vulnerable. When Clementine, the student with the Braille erotica, unleashed her telekinetic tantrum, it shattered his psychic defenses. His transformation was not an attack, it was a catastrophic failure of containment. He became the very thing he was trying to hold back. Youngblood felt a cold dread wash over him. And the pigs? The ones that ate Clementine. Voss's expression grew grim. An unfortunate truth. Clementine was saturated with the raw, unfiltered energy of the blind school's psychic backlash. When the pigs consumed her, they didn't just eat flesh, they ingested pure, concentrated chaos. It triggered a rapid, grotesque mutation. They became the physical manifestation of the town's collective ID, a perversion of nature fueled by a diet of psychic trauma and rotten food. Clotilde looked at the spot on the sofa where the egg had hatched. And my eggs? The rose gold dune buggy? The bayou's attempt at an antidote, Voss explained, his eyes shining with intellectual fervor. A revival mechanism. The eggs are concentrated nodes of balancing energy, the powder of life made manifest. The dune buggy is a psychic anchor, a tracer designed to ground the chaotic energies. It is a whimsical countermeasure to a severe threat. The bayou is trying to heal itself, using the only language it knows: absurdity. The room fell silent, save for the clicking of the ceiling fan and the distant, mournful yowling of a stray cat. The theory, bizarre as it was, made a terrifying kind of sense. It tied the disparate threads together into a cohesive, albeit terrifying, tapestry. So, Youngblood said, his voice barely above a whisper. What do we do? How do we stop it? We don't, Voss replied, his tone unconcerned, almost serene. We cannot fight the bayou. We must ride the wave. We must be cautious. Yes, but we must also find a place of acceptance. We must prepare for the flood, not try to build a wall against it. The next few days in Bayou Sainte-Mère were a strange, uneasy breather. The town, exhausted by the relentless pace of the bazaar, seemed to collectively exhale. The men with the newly sprouted tails found a strange camaraderie, forming a support group that met at the local San Antonio metal building, sharing tips on tailoring and the best brands of calamine lotion for chafing. The rumors about Sean subsided, replaced by a new, equally absurd rumor involving a city band with bright uniforms and a secret underground city beneath the railroad tracks. Sean, having survived his ordeal on the levee, had gone into hiding, slipping out of town to a secluded cabin deep in the marsh. He was sweating through the worst of his withdrawals, his body aching, his mind a pressure cooker of regret. He spent his days pruning the overgrown bushes around the cabin, a physical training regimen designed to keep his demons at bay. He was a broken man, but he was slowly, steadily, trying to rebuild his sound mind. He knew he had to do the crime of facing his past before he could ever hope to return. At Cora's malt shop, the atmosphere was subdued. Cora, her heart still aching from the cancelled wedding, found solace in the routine of her work. She served up milkshakes and tea cake with a forced smile, her eyes constantly scanning the door, hoping against hope for a good Samaritan to bring news of Sean. Ralph the parrot, sensing her melancholy, refrained from his usual swearing and instead offered a surprisingly touching rendition of an Al Jolson classic, his gravelly voice filling the hollow space in her heart. Janet the slime troll, still residing in Dorothea's cabinet, had found a strange peace. Ralph's intervention had saved her from a terrible mistake, and she now viewed her impending motherhood with a mixture of trepidation and awe. She occasionally burps up rosary beads, a harmless side effect of her unique biology, but she no longer feared the child she carried. She was protecting the skill of motherhood, perfecting the skill of patience. The town, though still a wasteland of logic, had found a temporary equilibrium. The dental dam still pulsed in the sky, a silent reminder of the invasion of the bazaar, but it no longer seemed an immediate threat. The mutated pigs had retreated into the deep swamp, their marching footsteps a distant memory. The rose-gold dune buggy occasionally zipped through the streets, a tiny, shining beacon of hope, its reverse lullaby a comforting noise in the night. Even the most absurd elements of the town seemed to have found a place. The antique croquet set on the convent lawn was now used for a bizarre high-stakes game involving water moccasin and other snakes of the bayou as wickets. The local radio station, a queer radio show hosted by a man who claimed to be the reincarnation of Lucifer, played a continuous loop of Zydeco music from a legendary Wayne Toops concert, the accordion-driven rhythms a perfect soundtrack for the town's madness. There were still moments of tension, of course. A brief tug-of-war over a particularly coveted piece of San Antonio metal building scrap almost escalated into a brawl, and a phony help-wanted sign promising a job in sex trafficking, which turned out to be a poorly worded ad for a local rodeo, caused a minor uproar. But these were mere ripples on the surface of a deep, dark pond. Youngblood, sitting on the porch of Clotilde's house, watched the sun set over the bayou, casting long, yellow shadows across the water. He felt a sense of sweet joy, a fleeting moment of peace amidst the chaos. He knew the calm wouldn't last. The bayou was a pressure cooker, and the pressure was building again. The guillotine of fate was still suspended above them, waiting to fall. But for now, they were safe. They had survived the first wave. They had found a straight line through the madness, a paradigm that made sense of the senseless. He took a sip of his sweet tea, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. He looked at Clotilde, who was nodding gently in her sleep, her levitation keeping her a few inches above the most hair sofa. He looked at Professor Voss, who was scribbling furiously in his notebook, documenting the town's descent into absurdity. And he looked at the bayou, a mysterious, festering, beautiful, terrifying place. "We're ready," he whispered to the whispering moss, to the silent trees, to the indifferent sky. "Whatever comes next, we're ready." And with that, the first chapter of their bizarre saga closed, leaving them grounded, flexible, and bracing for the inevitable storm that part two would surely bring. The bayou, with its cunning nature and its endless capacity for the absurd, was just getting started. End of Part 1. Chapter 11. The Marcasite Recipe and the Santa Maria Bell Tower. Months had fast-forwarded since the levee incident, since the pigs had scattered into the marshland, since Sean had slipped out of town and into the embrace of a self-imposed detox. Bayou Saint Mere, ever resilient, had settled into a new uneasy rhythm, a plateau of relative calm after the tremendous velocity of absurdity that had defined Part 1. The dental dam still pulsed in the sky, a mysterious and delirious sentinel, but its presence had become as commonplace as the humid air and the distant strains of Zydeco music from a phantom Wayne Toops concert. Janet the Slime Troll, however, remained a living, shimmering testament to the bayou's ongoing pervasion of the bizarre. Her pregnancy, now in its 13th month, had progressed to a state of astonishing and whimsical proportions. Her iridescent surface, usually a placid pool of shifting colours, now rippled with internal activity, as if a tiny, unseen jukebox jam sessions were occurring within. Casey, the Antichrist's cousin, had begun to communicate. Not through words, but through intricate drain symbols that would carve themselves onto Janet's belly from within, only to fade moments later. Janet, with a mother's intuitive understanding, claimed they were jokes, clean jokes, mind you, about the existential dread of being trapped in an elevator or the underwhelming performance of a car battery space heater. She had built a profound, almost soul-stirring rapport with her unborn child, a bond forged in the crucible of shared absurdity. She would chuckle softly as a new symbol appeared, a tiny, diagonal line bisecting a swirling vortex, which she translated as, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "To avoid the Taliban." It was a terrific and marvelous connection, a sweet joy in a world often devoid of it. But the bayou, like a booby-trapped quicksand pit, always had a way of pulling one back into its depths. A townsperson, a particularly nasty individual named Bixby, of the infamous 2 attempts on human experimentation fame, misinterpreted one of Casey's belly jokes. He saw a symbol that, to his perverted mind, clearly indicated that the father of Janet's child was still unknown, and worse, that the child was a harbinger of a new invasion of Lucifer's minions. Bixby, a man whose life was a testament to disgraceful behavior, began flapping his gums, spreading the word like a virulent, vomit-borne plague. The old rumors, the malevolence and suspicion that had driven Sean into hiding, began to revive, rewind, and steadily fester. The town, ever eager for a new scapegoat, began to bow up again, their collective resentment a palpable force. They were criticizing Janet, dictating her fate, their voices a shuddering noise that echoed through the streets. Meanwhile, Sean's detox, supported by Cora, had been a sobering and arduous journey. He had spent weeks in a secluded cabin, battling his demons, his body racked with tremors, his mind a pressure cooker of unseen currents. Cora, his whole-hearted and able-bodied fiancée, had been his rock, her unwavering love, a fortress against his self-destruction. They were now pre-planning their wedding, a quiet affair, a testament to their enduring love. Sean, revitalized and grounded, was a man reborn, his once hollow eyes now filled with a hopeful light. He had learned to protect the skill of sobriety, perfecting the skill of self-control. He even found himself chuckling at the memory of the fruit melon incident, a hilarious reminder of how far he had come. They had even started a dream journal, documenting their shared visions of a future free from the bayou's peculiar brand of chaos. Cora, however, was experiencing a new kind of dread. She had been feeling a strange, almost overwhelming sense of guilt. Not for Sean, but for something else, something she couldn't quite articulate. She had also started to experience sudden, unexplained weight gain, a phenomenon that defied her usually rigorous physical training regimen. Her moo-moo dresses, once comfortably loose, now felt tight and constricting. She suspected it was linked to the ongoing weirdness, a psychic side effect of living in Bayou Saint Mere. She felt a profound loss of her powers, her usual resilience slipping away, replaced by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. She was trembling with a quiet fear, a listless anxiety that gnawed at her body and soul. Youngblood, on the other hand, was experiencing a profound sense of jubilation. His transformation, far from being a curse, had become a blessing. He found himself elevating his senses, dreaming with a newfound clarity, chewing on philosophical concepts with a voracious appetite. He was fumigating his past, rummaging through his memories, finding a new sense of purpose. He was operating on a higher plane of existence, his language now infused with a deeper understanding of the bayou's strange science. He was parading his new identity with a jaunty confidence, his yellow aura radiating a vibrant energy. He was reveling in his new self, stepping into a future he never imagined. He was vouching for the power of transformation, wearing his new skin with pride. He was nudging the boundaries of reality, inquiring into the deeper mysteries of the bayou. He was zooming through life with a newfound zest, his spirit revitalized. Clotilde, meanwhile, was experiencing a profound sense of exasperation. Her eggs, after the rose-gold dune buggy, had continued to hatch, each one revealing a new, equally absurd, and often inconvenient, artifact. A tiny, sentient Chihuahua rice pudding that demanded to be fed every 2 hours. A miniature Santa Maria bell tower that chimed incessantly, its tiny bells echoing with the sound of 1,000 tiny pop quiz questions. A marcasite recipe for eternal youth that required the tears of a Heman action figure. She was swearing under her breath, her usual serene demeanor replaced by a look of profound weariness. She felt like she was in a chokehold of absurdity, her life a constant jousting tournament against the forces of chaos. She was underestimating the sheer volume of weirdness that the bayou could produce. She was weaning herself off the expectation of normalcy, accepting her new role as the bayou's reluctant curator of the bizarre. The catalyst for most of the drama, however, was triggered by the discovery of a feces on a paper plate, left on the convent doorstep. It was a dastardly act, a clear message of malevolence, a raw deal for the already beleaguered nuns. The plate, adorned with a single mouldy tea cake, was a symbol of the town's simmering resentment. It was a hint, a print of the growing unrest, a bone of contention that threatened to ignite a new firestorm. The annual town festival, usually a time of pleasant revelry and jubilation, became a crucible of tension. The air was thick with the scent of raw meat from the barbecue pits, mingling with the sweet, cloying aroma of Turkish delights from a new vendor. Children scampering through the crowds, their faces smeared with cotton candy, seemed oblivious to the underlying currents of suspicion and malevolence. A one-room schoolhouse had been set up as a makeshift cram session for the men with tails, where they practiced dictating their new language to each other, their voices a cacophony of growling and babbling. A jukebox jam sessions played classic rock, its melodies a stark contrast to the simmering tension. Motion sensors had been installed around the main stage, a precaution against any further Sukhomedic-esque outbursts. Professor Voss, ever the scientist, had set up a makeshift laboratory near the Santa Maria bell tower, his equipment a bizarre array of walkie-talkies, drip-drop counters, and a particularly ominous-looking water pipe connected to a refinery of unknown purpose. He was conducting a series of tests, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had collected samples from Janet, from the mutated pigs, from the very air of Bayou Saint-Mere. He was determined to find a diagnosis, a scientific explanation for the perversion that had gripped their town. He was pressing with feeling, his scientific rigor a beacon in the darkness. As the sun began to set, casting long yellow shadows across the festival grounds, the crowd gathered around the main stage. The moment of truth had arrived. Professor Voss, his face solemnly serious, stepped up to the microphone. He spoke of the unfortunate truth, of the interconnectedness of all things, of the yin-yang of chaos and order. He spoke of the historical significance of the bayou, of its unique ability to sustain both beauty and horror. He spoke of the veracity of his findings, of the undeniable evidence that had led him to a truly astonishing conclusion. "We have conducted extensive tests," Professor Voss announced, his voice echoing through the crowd. "And we have made a tremendous discovery. The father of Janet, the slime troll's unborn child, Casey, is Dorothea." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. Dorothea, who had been standing near the bleachers, casually nibbling on a tea cake, felt the blood drain from her face. Her hairdo, usually impeccable, seemed to wilt. She hung her head in shame, the weight of the revelation crushing her body and soul. The crowd erupted, their whispers turning into shouts, their malevolence now directed at Dorothea. The dastardly rumor, the fake accusation, had been a detour, a clever misdirection. The truth, far stranger and more absurd, had finally been revealed. The Choctaw drums, which had been playing a rhythmic beat, suddenly fell silent. The North Pole seemed to shift on its axis. A black hole of understanding opened in the minds of the townspeople. And somewhere, in the depths of the crowd, a character, let's say, a minor character, a wingman to one of the men with tails, experienced the stigmata, blood weeping from his hands and feet, a physical manifestation of the town's collective shock and religious ecstasy. It was a ceremony of chaos, a Jewish tradition of the absurd. The dental dam in the sky pulsed with a renewed vigor, its eerie glow casting long, distorted shadows on the stunned faces of the townspeople. The bayou, ever the master of the unexpected, had once again delivered a climax that defied all expectations, leaving its inhabitants dumbfounded, wet pants, and utterly bewildered. To be continued in Part 2.